The words themselves, delivered with a breathless, almost sensual hush, ripped through the thin fabric of my composure like a razor-tipped shard of glass. You killed that boy at summer camp, Leo. 22 years ago, you and your gutter friends thought it would be funny to have him climb the tree since you stole his favorite pair of pants when he was asleep and put them on top of the tree limb. You watched, laughed, and mocked him as he scaled the tree, and then you threw stones at him until he fell off. I know you reflect on it a lot, but it's not with guilt so much as it is the fear that someone will find out about it, or one of those buddies will make a mistake and confess to it. The air in my rented room, already stale and heavy with the scent of forgotten lives, seemed to solidify around me, pressing in. Sweat, cold and viscous, prickled on my skin. My hand, still clenched around the phone, felt suddenly alien, disconnected. My eyes stared, unseeing. The words themselves, delivered with a breathless, almost sensual hush, ripped through the thin fabric of my composure like a razor-tipped shard of glass. You killed that boy at summer camp, Leo. 22 years ago, you and your gutter friends thought it would be funny to have him climb the tree since you stole his favorite pair of pants when he was asleep and put them on top of the tree limb. You watched, laughed, and mocked him as he scaled the tree, and then you threw stones at him until he fell off. I know you reflect on it a lot, but it's not with guilt so much as it is the fear that someone will find out about it, or one of those buddies will make a mistake and confess to it. The air in my rented room, already stale and heavy with the scent of forgotten lives, seemed to solidify around me, pressing in. Sweat, cold and viscous, prickled on my skin. My hand, still clenched around the phone, felt suddenly alien, disconnected. My eyes stared, unseeing, at the peeling paint of the opposite wall. The memory, a jagged scar on the landscape of my youth, burst forth from its cage, sharp and agonizing. Every detail, every cruel laugh, every helpless whimper, every sickening thud, played out in excruciating clarity, not as a reflection, but as a live, visceral rerun. This wasn't just dirty talk anymore. This was an excavation, a curse delivered through a distorted lover's whisper. And it was real. Funny, isn't it? How you spend your life running from shadows, only to find the darkest one coiled right inside your own bed. Or rather, your phone. It had all started, as these things often do, with a desperate, if ill-advised, attempt at normalcy, a fragile bridge to a quiet kind of intimacy, built across miles of empty highway and the echoing silence of countless lonely nights. Life on the road, taking the graveyard shifts and the no-questions-asked jobs, it's a good way to keep a low profile. A good way to fade into the background until the next thing finds you. Most recently, it was behind a polished bar top in a nameless town, the air thick with stale beer and cheap perfume, bartending, late nights, a steady stream of faces I'd never see again. Perfect. It gave me something to do with my hands, kept my mind from circling the drain of its usual anxieties. But even I, Leo Vance, the weary wanderer, sometimes craved a voice that wasn't my own cynical internal monologue, a connection, however tenuous. That's where Beth came in. Beth Chansey, long distance, perfect. No messy cohabitation, no shared leases, no waking up to a familiar face that might suddenly morph into something monstrous, or worse, become a target. Just a voice, a presence through a crackling phone line, an image pixelated on a screen. We met, as these things happen, through a mutual acquaintance from a previous, mercifully brief gig. We bonded over shared late-night schedules and a mutual appreciation for bad horror movies. Free Wi-Fi became our reluctant Cupid, weaving a thread of pseudo-intimacy across state lines. Whenever our schedules aligned, usually after I'd wiped down the last sticky countertop and locked up the liquor, we'd connect. Phone calls, video chats. It was the only way to squeeze in anything resembling a relationship. Given my nomadic existence, visits were rare, fleeting, almost ceremonial in their infrequency. The majority of our interaction was digital. Most nights, after my shift ended and the last drunk had stumbled out into the fluorescent glow of the streetlights, I'd pull out my beat-up phone, my hands, and still smelling faintly of cleanser and stale hops, would punch in her number, a number I'd committed to memory like a sacred mantra. She'd usually be asleep, but the vibration of her phone would stir her, and her voice, thick with sleep, would answer. That was our time. Our strange digital space for connection, for release. Sometimes it would devolve into what some might call phone sex or cam sex. I knew what people thought of it, the judgment in their eyes. But what did I care? Most people wouldn't understand. They couldn't understand the kind of loneliness that gnaws at you when your life is a constant escape, when every new face is a potential threat or a reminder of what you've lost. For me, it was a release, a small rebellion against the suffocating solitude, a way to feel something, anything, beyond the constant hum of low-grade dread. And yes, it was a kink. There, I said it. Something about the disembodied voice, the suggestive whispers, the slow build of intimacy through words alone. It created a world of shared fantasy, a bubble of warped reality where I could, for a fleeting moment, forget the things that followed me. "What are you wearing?" I remembered asking her one night. The background noise on her end was a soft, rhythmic exhaling, the kind that spoke of contentedness, of a body relaxing into the sheets. My own room, a temporary box of fading wallpaper and borrowed furniture, felt cold by comparison. My fingers idly traced the worn leather of my jacket, slung over the back of the chair beside me, a constant, comforting presence. Then the silence stretched, just a beat too long. My gut, usually a reliable barometer for incoming trouble, gave a small, almost imperceptible twitch. It was the same twitch I felt before the sound of scratching started in the walls of that apartment, or the precise moment before Mitch's eyes went dead, his smile becoming something else. It was the precursor to a bad read. Her voice, when it came, was different, low, throaty, but with an edge that was new, unfamiliar. "Why aren't you worried?" I blinked. My thumb instinctively went to the cool metal of my wristwatch, turning the crown back and forth, a nervous tick I'd picked up somewhere along the desolate highways of my life. Worried about what? My mind, perpetually on alert for the next threat, cycled through possibilities. Had I forgotten something? A utility bill? A check I needed to cash? A missed call from a ghost? "Wait, what?" I stammered, the stutter betraying a flicker of genuine confusion. The rules of this particular game, a game of whispered desires and implied vulnerabilities, seemed to have shifted. She chuckled, a low, husky sound that was usually intoxicating, but tonight it had a brittle quality to it, like ice cracking on a winter pond. "I asked you, why aren't you naked?" Her reiteration was so phonetically different from what my ears had originally processed that I felt a flush of heat rise to my face. Right, of course. Naked. Brains fried. Leo. Too many late nights serving cheap whiskey to desperate people. I pushed the fleeting moment of unease, that strange auditory glitch, to the side. It was a kink, after all. These things got creative. Maybe she was trying to surprise me. I let myself be drawn back into the familiar current of teasing, the flirtation, the indulgence, a small, necessary escape. "I won't tell anyone," she said later, the noise of her blankets rustling over her naked form, smothering me in waves of sound. A digital lullaby of supposed intimacy. The air hummed with the faint crackle of the connection, a static undercurrent to her words. My brow furrowed. That was odd, even for Beth. "What do you mean?" "About what you did. Silly." The word silly was delivered with a kind of saccharine sweetness that felt deeply unsettling. like sugar coating a poison pill. A cold prickle started on the back of my neck. What I did? My mind raced, trying to pull up any recent misdemeanors. Had I sent a particularly risque text to the wrong number? Accidentally revealed a secret fantasy that was a little too dark, even for this game? My conscience, that little spark of decency I always regretted having, began to churn. It wasn't just the words, it was the way she said them. The underlying current of knowledge that felt wrong. It reminded me of the unnerving certainty in Ethan's eyes just before he'd started talking about the meat. A knowing glint that bespoke a hunger deeper than anything human. Or the way Olivia had looked at me, a predatory assessment beneath her painted smile. Seeing not a man, but a collection of raw materials. This was different. This was personal. I tried to shake it off. It was just a game, a way to heighten the tension, to delve deeper into the shared fantasy. That's all it was. Couldn't be anything more. I worked my shift the next day, the clinking of glasses and the drone of small talk doing little to dislodge the unsettling phrase from my mind. What you did, silly. It clung to me, a burr under the saddle of my usual detachment. I mixed drinks, smiled empty smiles, my eyes constantly scanning the room, as if the answer to Beth's cryptic words would materialize in the form of a drunk patron or a flickering neon sign. But the only answers were the questions swirling in my own head. I found myself checking my watch every few minutes, not for the time, but for the comforting weight of the metal, the familiar tick of its mechanism, a small anchor in the rising tide of my unease. I eagerly awaited for my shift to end, not for rest, but for answers. The moment the last customer left and the door was double locked, I made a beeline for my apartment. I didn't even bother taking off my jacket, the familiar worn leather a second skin. I just dropped my go bag by the door, old habit, always ready to bolt, and immediately called her. "I'm a bit unsure as to what you meant when we last talked," I said, my voice carefully neutral, even though my heart was doing a frantic drum solo against my ribs. I tried to make it sound casual, like I was just seeking clarification on a particularly intricate roleplay scenario. Keep it light. Leo, don't spook the whatever this is. Oh, I thought you enjoyed it. I don't remember saying anything as much as I moaned. Her voice was lighter now, almost innocent, too innocent. It felt like a trap, like a hunter laying bait. That part was amazing, Beth, you know that. I lied, trying to sound convincing. No, I meant my secret. Do you mean our role-playing? Your tone didn't indicate that. Should I feel guilty about something within our world? Our fantasy life? I can tone it down if you want me to. Maybe I've been too forward or aggressive lately. I was grasping at straws, desperate for her to confirm it was all part of the game. Anything but the alternative. My internal monologue was screaming, "Run, Leo, run." This is how it starts. This is how they get under your skin, how they find the cracks. The memory of the man in the walls, his presence a violation of space, a whisper of unseen things flashed through my mind. This felt like that, but worse. This felt like a violation of self. She started laughing, not a polite titter or a sensual giggle, but a full, unrestrained peal of laughter that felt mocking. It went on for what felt like 10 minutes, echoing in the confined space of my apartment, grating on my nerves until I wanted to rip the phone from my ear. It wasn't a human sound. It was the kind of laughter that comes from something that finds your suffering inherently amusing, something utterly devoid of empathy. Like the hungry chittering I imagined from the things that had chased me through the woods that night after the NDE, when heaven turned out to be nothing more than a grotesque slaughterhouse, when it finally subsided. She cleared her throat, a surprisingly mundane sound after such a chilling performance, and began speaking again. "No," she said, the single word cutting through the remaining echo of her laughter. "That's not what I intended at all. How about we both get naked and discuss this further?" The lizard part of my brain, the ancient, primal part that screamed, survive, could do nothing but give in. It was a strange fascination, a morbid curiosity, like staring into the mouth of a pit you know is bottomless. I told myself it was to get answers, to understand. But a deeper, darker part of me knew it was also a form of perverse self-punishment, the reluctant conscience driving me towards the very danger I knew I should avoid. I stripped slowly, my movements mechanical, my eyes fixed on the blank wall, imagining her, imagining the pixels on the screen coming to life, revealing, what? What kind of monster wore the face of a lover? As her gasps of pleasure seemed to fill my body with a near electrical burst, a strange, terrifying counterfeit of intimacy. The connection on the line hummed, vibrating with an unseen energy. My own breaths were ragged, caught between manufactured ecstasy and genuine terror. And then, in between the sudden emanations of bliss, a sentence, delivered with an almost bored casualness, like discussing the weather, that sent a chill through me, colder than any winter night on the road, colder than the breath of the dead man on the mountain pass. It was a chill that sank into my bones, into the marrow, and settled there like a block of ice. "You killed that boy at summer camp," she said again, the words echoing, resonating with a terrifying certainty. 22 years ago, you and your gutter friends thought it would be funny to have him climb the tree since you stole his favorite pair of pants when he was asleep and put them on top of the tree limb. You watched, laughed, and mocked him as he scaled the tree, and then you threw stones at him until he fell off. I know you reflect on it a lot, but it's not with guilt so much as it is the fear that someone will find out about it, or one of those buddies will make a mistake and confess to it. The phone slipped from my suddenly numb fingers, clattering against the cheap laminate of the nightstand. I stopped, mid-breath. A strangled gasp caught in my throat. My vision blurred. I wiped the sweat from my brow, but it was useless. More instantly sprang up, cold and clammy. I chewed on her words, and not literally, but grinding them over and over in my mind, searching for a crack, a flaw, a reason for them to be false. But there was none, alarming as they were, impossible as they should have been. She was right, horrifyingly, irrefutably right. No one but my 3 friends and I knew about it. Not a soul. It was a secret buried so deep, so thoroughly compartmentalized, that even I rarely let myself think of it, save for the occasional nightmare that would jolt me awake in a cold sweat, the phantom scream of a boy echoing in the dark. It was the original sin, the thing that had always been a shadow behind me, even before the real shadows started stretching and twisting into impossible shapes. Or so I thought, for the first time in what felt like forever. I hung up on her. I didn't just press the button, I slammed it, as if trying to physically sever the connection to the horror she had just delivered. My hand, one still trembling, went to my watch again. But this time I didn't just fiddle with the crown. I stared at the face, the steady sweep of the second hand, a stark reminder of the passage of time, of how long this terrible secret had festered. 22 years, a lifetime. My mind, usually so adept at evasion, at constructing walls around the truly awful things, was now a chaotic maelstrom of fear and confusion. How could she know? Was this some elaborate prank? Had one of my old buddies finally cracked under the weight of it, drunkenly confessed to a stranger? The thought curdled my stomach. I had trusted those men with a piece of my soul, a piece I wished I could excise with a rusty knife. But then, trust was a luxury I couldn't afford anymore. Not after Mitch. Not after seeing what people were capable of, what lurked beneath a smiling veneer of normalcy. With a desperate, almost feverish energy, I grabbed my phone again. My finger, still clumsy with shock, typed out messages to all 3 of my friends involved in that incident. 3 ghosts from a past I desperately wanted to forget, now reanimated by Beth's chilling words. "Do you know Beth? One in Ohio?" The question was direct, stripped bare of any pleasantries, without any obvious intent beyond a simple inquiry. I needed a clean answer. An unvarnished yes or no. I waited, the silence in my apartment growing louder, more oppressive with each passing second. It felt like the air itself was holding its breath, waiting for the other shoe to drop. Two of them responded within a day. A single, terse text from Mark. No. And a slightly longer one from Terry. Beth? Don't think so. Man? Who's asking? You okay? The obligatory question marks, the casual disinterest. Neither of them knew her. My mind, always prone to conspiracies, had initially conjured up a scenario where she had fooled around with one of my friends, digging up the dirt from them. It was a desperate, grasping attempt at a rational explanation, however sordid, but that admittedly did not make any sense. I had never given her the names of any of my childhood pals, let alone introduced her to any of them. I was too careful for that, too guarded. My life was segmented, compartmentalized. The past stayed in the past, or at least, that was the idea. So it did not logically add up that she would have somehow found them, let alone extracted such a deeply buried, incriminating secret. This wasn't just a betrayal, it was an impossibility. It was the universe twisting itself inside out, revealing a horrifying truth that defied all reason. The dread, which had been a slow simmer, now boiled over, scalding my insides. There was only one other way she could have known, a way that sent a fresh wave of ice-cold fear through me. She knew because she knew, because somehow, impossible as it seemed, she was connected to the victim. I had to know. The reluctant conscience, that accursed flaw, dragged me forward. I couldn't just run from this. Not this. This was my personal ghost, finally stepping out of the shadows. I needed to confront it, or at least identify it, before it consumed me entirely. I packed my go bag instinctively, my hands moving with practiced efficiency, but I wasn't leaving. Not yet. I needed to look into it. I needed to understand the exact nature of the threat. It was something that I was always afraid to look into, for both emotional and pragmatic reasons. The sheer, suffocating guilt of it. The years I'd spent trying to bury it, to deny its existence, and selfishly, I did not want a cyber trail connecting me to the tragedy, to the boy whose life we had so casually extinguished. I was Leo Vance. I lived in the shadows, leaving no digital breadcrumbs. But this was different. This was an active threat. I left my apartment, the silence amplifying the frantic beat of my heart, and walked for what felt like miles. The worn leather of my jacket a familiar comfort against the biting night air. My hand kept going to my watch, winding the crown, a futile attempt to rewind time, to undo what had been done. I ended up at a dimly lit internet cafe near my temporary residence, the kind of place that smelled of stale coffee, desperation, and questionable ethics. The screens cast a sickly blue glow on the faces of its nocturnal patrons, each lost in their own digital worlds, their own forms of escape or depravity. I paid for an hour, slipped into a shadowy corner, and hunched over a keyboard, my fingers hovering, hesitant, looking up the boy's demise. It felt like breaking a taboo, tearing open an old wound. I used every precaution I knew, every trick for anonymity I'd picked up over the years of trying to stay invisible. Encrypted searches, poached internet connections, bounce servers, a digital ghost hunting another ghost. The keyboard clacked softly under my fingers, the sound too loud in the hushed cafe. The images on the screen flickered, text scrolling by, a cold, clinical recounting of a horror I had lived. My breath hitched in my throat as I finally found it. A small, faded newspaper article from a local archive. The date, the location, the brief, sanitized description of a tragic accident. My eyes, already strained from the dim light and the relentless glare of the screen, scanned down, searching for the name, the one detail Beth had so casually dropped. What I found left me haunted, not just by the memory of the summer camp, but by a new, horrifying realization, a new layer of absolute dread. The boy's full name was Philip Chansey. The name, stark and undeniable, hung in the sickly blue light of the screen, a spectral accusation. Philip Chansey and Beth Chansey. The implications hit me like a physical blow, knocking the wind from my lungs. She wasn't just some random woman who'd stumbled onto my darkest secret. She was family, the victim's family. Was she his sister? His mother? Perhaps miraculously still alive, impossibly young, or something else entirely? Something that had taken on her form, her voice to deliver this precise, exquisite torment? The thought made the hairs on my arms stand on end. This wasn't just a person knowing my secret. This was the secret itself. Walking, talking, breathing, and wearing the face of someone I had allowed into the intimate, guarded space of my life. This was the past, not just catching up, but wrapping its cold, dead fingers around my throat. This was what the NDE had told me. There's no escape. No matter how far you run, no matter how deep you bury it, the universe, or whatever malevolent force governs it, will always find a way to make you pay, and it will always find the most painful way possible. I closed the browser, the screen going black, reflecting my own pale, horrified face back at me. Another layer of trauma, another phantom to carry. My existence, already a burden, had just grown infinitely heavier, and I knew, with the chilling certainty of a man who has seen too much, that this was just the beginning. The blaring, metallic shriek of the horn tore through the chamber, a sound that felt less like a signal and more like a final, mocking pronouncement from whatever twisted architect designed this hell. My lungs screamed, burning with every ragged gasp, the air tasting of ozone, fear, and a cloying, metallic tang I knew too well. My legs, leaden and rebellious, slammed against the cold, unforgiving floor, each impact rattling my teeth, sending jolts of agony up my spine. My vision swam, a dizzying kaleidoscope of gray and black, but I pushed, driven by a primal, desperate need to simply move, to put distance between myself and the unseen horrors that gnashed in the suffocating darkness behind me. I burst through the narrow opening, a sliver of desperate hope, and heard the sickening thud of the massive door slamming shut, severing the connection to the nightmare I'd just escaped. Silence, sudden and absolute, descended like a shroud. My chest heaved, my hands still outstretched, grasping for something, anything, solid. Then the terror truly set in. I turned, my pulse hammering against my eardrums, a frantic drumbeat against the newfound quiet. "Mina?" I rasped, my voice a raw, desperate croak. But she wasn't there. It felt like an eternity ago, though it had probably only been hours, that the first game had ended. Red Rover. A twisted nursery rhyme played out in a sterile room, bathed in the sickly yellow glow of fluorescent lights. The metallic tang of fresh blood still clung to the air, thick and cloying, a bitter aftertaste to the horror that had just unfolded. Those of us who were left, a handful of trembling, gasping figures, stood amidst the ruins of what we once considered humanity. Our breaths were shallow, caught in throats constricted by unshed screams, our bodies humming with a nervous energy that felt less like life and more like the frayed edges of a live wire. Death, invisible yet palpable, clung to us like a second skin, a cold, heavy cloak woven from the screams that still echoed in the mausoleum of my mind. The echoes refused to fade, looping in my memory like a particularly cruel nightmare, the kind you fight to wake from, only to find yourself still trapped within its confines. My gaze, as if drawn by some morbid magnet, dropped to the floor. Dark, wet stains smeared the polished surface, silent testaments to the fallen, their eyes wide and vacant, frozen in final expressions of fear and pain, seemed to stare up at me, accusing. You were there, you saw them go, and you did nothing. A wave of nausea churned in my gut, hot and acrid. It was the familiar taste of complicity, of survival at any cost, a price tag etched in blood. The game should have been over. Logic, a concept long abandoned in this place, screamed for a pause, a moment to breathe, to process the grotesque dance we just performed. Time to mourn. But deep down, a cynical voice that had become my constant companion here knew better. There was no time for grief here, no time for regret, only the gnawing, all-consuming terror of what came next. This was just another Tuesday, another hellish iteration of the cursed existence I'd been living since that night in Sycamore Grove. My hands went to my wrist, my fingers tracing the cold, familiar face of my analog watch. More a nervous tick than a need to know the time. Time had no meaning here anyway. Only the relentless march towards the next horror. The overhead lights flickered, casting erratic shadows that danced like phantoms across the featureless, impossibly high walls. They hummed with a low, ominous buzz, a sound that grated on my already frayed nerves. These walls, smooth and stark, offered no escape, no indication of what fresh torment awaited us. Then one of the speakers, mounted somewhere above our heads, crackled to life, static giving way to a voice as devoid of warmth as the air around us. Congratulations, survivors. You have successfully completed the first game. Survivors. The word tasted like ash in my mouth. Not players, not competitors, just survivors. Like rats scurrying from a sinking ship, or cockroaches scattering from a stomped boot. It was a cold, clinical term that stripped away all pretense of humanity. We were just things that hadn't died yet. The second game will now commence. I clenched my fists, knuckles white, the tips of my fingers digging into my clammy palms. My heart hammered against my ribcage, a frantic, erratic rhythm, like an animal trapped in a snare, sensing its inevitable end. The room felt colder, the oppressive chill seeping into my bones, through the worn leather of my jacket, a chill that had nothing to do with temperature and everything to do with dread. The shadows seemed to stretch, elongating, twisting into monstrous shapes, as if they too were sentient, watching, waiting for us to falter. A strange, unsettling sense of unease slithered through my veins, colder than the deepest winter, whispering that this wasn't just fear. It was something deeper, something ancient, something intrinsically wrong. My mind screamed at me to prepare, to steel myself. But how do you prepare for the unknown? For something that lurked beyond reason, hidden behind the grotesque illusion of a game. My breath hitched in shallow, uneven gas, catching in my throat like shards of glass. The speakers clicked, a final, chilling punctuation mark, and then, with a pneumatic hiss, a massive door slid open, revealing the path to the next nightmare. We were herded forward, cattle to the slaughter, moving because the alternative was unthinkable, unimaginable. As I stepped through the threshold, the stark white walls of the previous chamber dissolved, replaced by a sight that initially, sickeningly, seemed almost innocent, a playground, the kind you'd see in a municipal park, or perhaps even a kindergarten. Colorful, bouncy rubber flooring stretched beneath our worn shoes, a jarring contrast to the blood-stained concrete we just left. A massive circle, outlined in a bright, almost cheerful red, dominated the center of the space. Wooden benches, the kind meant for parents to watch their children play, lined the edges. At first glance, it looked harmless, just another childhood game brought to life, a perverse mockery of simpler times. But nothing here was ever simple. Nothing. My gaze swept over the pristine surface, searching for the hidden seam, the telltale crack, the subtle wrongness that I knew, with every fiber of my being, had to be there. This place reeked of a calculated deceit, a promise of normalcy that would be shattered in the most brutal way imaginable. It was the same insidious feeling I got when the quiet of a house felt too quiet, like something was holding its breath just beyond the veil of perception. I glanced at Mina, who stood beside me, her jaw clenched, eyes narrowed, scanning the space with the same predatory intensity I often felt simmering within myself. She was different from the others, not just desperate to survive, but prepared, as if she'd walked this tightrope before, navigated these depths of engineered terror. An impossible thought, perhaps, or perhaps, in this place, nothing truly was. "Something's wrong," she muttered, her voice a low growl that was barely audible above the faint hum of the overhead lights. I didn't need to respond. A curt nod sufficed. Of course, something's wrong. When isn't it? Then, the mechanical, disembodied voice returned, echoing off the high ceiling, reverberating in the cavity of my chest. "Welcome to the second game. Duck, duck, goose." A ripple of confusion, almost a murmur of relief, spread through the small, remaining group. Some players exchanged uncertain glances, a flicker of bewildered hope in their eyes. Others, too traumatized, too broken to care, remained silent, their gazes fixed on nothing, lost in their own private hells. The rules are simple. Players will form a circle, sitting cross-legged on the floor. One player will be chosen as it. They will walk around the circle, selecting their target by tapping them and saying, "Goose." The chosen goose must then chase it around the circle before it claims their seat. A few more players visibly relaxed, a collective exhale of tension. It sounded normal. Too normal. That was the first red flag, the subtle drop in temperature before the storm. The little hairs on my arms stood on end, my gut twisted, a familiar knot of dread coiling tighter. If it successfully claims the seat, the goose is eliminated. Eliminated. That word, it hung in the air, a chilling echo of the previous game, a single, brutal word loaded with the weight of shattered lives and spilled blood. It was the ultimate euphemism, a polite way of saying dead. A sharp chill crept up my spine, spreading like icy fingers crawling beneath my skin. My breath caught, a sudden, suffocating weight pressing against my chest, making it hard to inhale. The air itself felt heavier, charged with something unseen, something waiting, watching. My pulse quickened, an instinctive response to an unknown threat, a primal alarm blaring in my brain. This wasn't just fear, this was dread, the kind that coiled deep in the gut, whispering that something was very, very wrong. A game of children, perverted, a game of death. Someone swallowed audibly, the sound loud in the oppressive silence. "That's just a normal game," a voice whispered, laced with a desperate, hopeful tremor. "We just have to run." Mina exhaled sharply beside me, a slow, deliberate breath, as if she were steadying herself for a blow. She didn't speak right away, letting the silence stretch, heavy and pregnant with unspoken truths. Then, in a voice so quiet I barely heard it, a voice that carried the weary resonance of countless horrors, when she muttered, "You really think it's that easy?" Something about the way she said it sent a colder shiver down my spine than any icy draft. Not just her words, on how she said them, like she already knew the answer, like she'd seen this twisted charade before, or knew its dark heart intrinsically. I glanced at her, expecting confusion or fear, but what I saw instead was a profound, chilling understanding, a recognition of the pattern. That's when it clicked. The pieces fell into place with a sickening thud. This wasn't just another game. It was a performance, a meticulously calculated deception, designed to make us think we understood the rules, only to rip them away, to reveal the true, brutal nature of the game, just when it was too late. This was how they toyed with us, stripping away our sanity, our hope, before they finally took our lives. It was the same insidious trick fear always played, the same whispers of doubt that had plagued me since Sycamore Grove. The same feeling of being a puppet on invisible strings, dancing to a tune I couldn't hear. I tightened my fists, digging my nails into my palms until the pain was a sharp, grounding counterpoint to the rising tide of panic. I needed to think. I needed to be ready. Because if there's one thing I learned in this endless nightmare, it's that the worst part isn't knowing you might die. It's realizing you were never meant to live. However, the voice continued, its mechanical cadence unbroken, if the goose catches it before they sit, then it will be eliminated instead. The unspoken weight of the game settled in, heavy and suffocating. It wasn't a game of chase. It was a death chase. A zero-sum equation where one life was bought with another's demise. A cruel, elegant trap that turned prey into predator, forcing us to become the very thing we feared, just to buy another precious second. We were instructed to sit. My legs folded beneath me, stiff and unwilling, protesting against the indignity of this morbid charade. I pressed my palms against the soft, slightly tacky rubber flooring, trying to steady myself, to ground myself in something real. Mina sat beside me, her presence a grim anchor in the swirling chaos of my thoughts. Our circle formed, a twisted mockery of childhood nostalgia, a ring of fear. Each face was a mask of strained composure, eyes darting, searching, already calculating the odds. The first player was chosen, a tall man, his face gaunt, his eyes hollow, mirroring the emptiness I often felt inside myself. His breath was uneven, ragged, the sound cutting through the tense silence. He stood. He began to walk. The sound of his slow, measured footsteps filled the space, each heel strike a dull thud against the rubber, each step echoing like a drumbeat against my skull. The tension was unbearable, a palpable thing that pressed down on us all, squeezing the air from our lungs. Each step felt like a death sentence waiting to be passed, a ticking clock counting down to someone's demise. His hand hovered over heads, hesitating, choosing, a macabre deity selecting its next sacrifice. Then, his palm tapped a girl's shoulder. The sound, a soft thwack, was shockingly loud in the silence. Goose! For half a second, she didn't move. She blinked. Once, twice, as if the word hadn't yet fully registered in her terror-addled brain. A flicker of incomprehension. Then pure, unadulterated horror bloomed in her eyes. Then, she bolted. The chase was clumsy, desperate, a chaotic scramble for survival. Her limbs flailed, uncoordinated, as she pushed forward, trying to catch him, trying to stop herself from dying, trying to outrun the inevitable. He moved fast, too fast, his adrenaline-fueled legs propelling him toward the empty seat, his target, a silent, brutal race against time and gravity. He lunged. She reached. A single second stretched into an eternity, an agonizing slow-motion tableau of life and death hanging precariously in the balance. Then, his body slammed into the seat, a dull, sickening thud. For a moment, all was still. The air hung heavy, thick with the scent of fear and sweat, the silence deafening, a collective, unspoken breath held. Then, the rubber flooring beneath her vanished with a sudden, horrifying whoosh. She barely had time to scream, a strangled, cut-off sound, more gasp than shriek, before she was gone. Swallowed whole by the hungry maw of the floor, the panel closed seamlessly, silently, as if she were never there at all, as if the very ground itself conspired to erase her existence. Mina didn't even flinch. She just watched, her fingers gripping her knees so tightly that her knuckles turned white, bone pressing against bone. Her jaw was still set, her eyes unreadable. She knew something. She knew something we didn't. The thought both chilled and fascinated me. In this place, knowing was a power, but it was also a curse. The game continued, one by one. Players rose, their turns coming, a relentless, horrifying lottery. Some survived. their faces a mixture of relief and a freshly etched horror. Others did not, disappearing into the void beneath the floor, leaving behind only an echoing absence. The numbers dwindled, like candle flames snuffed out one by one in an unrelenting, merciless wind. The floor was no longer just a surface, it was a gaping mouth, yawning open to consume those too slow, too weak, too hesitant, a merciless beast waiting for its next sacrifice. Each round felt worse than the last, the air growing heavier, thick with sweat, fear, and the ghostly echoes of the fallen. My hands were clammy, slick with a cold sweat that seeped through my jacket sleeves. My breath shallow, each inhale a struggle. I was running out of time. The game wasn't just choosing victims at random. It was watching, assessing, hunting, and we were nothing more than prey caught in its snare. Our survival a fleeting reprieve before the inevitable. My body trembled, a fine tremor that started deep in my bones and vibrated through every muscle. My mind screamed, a cacophony of desperate thoughts, of run, hide, fight. My eyes darted to the floor beneath me, waiting, dreading, for the moment it would decide to swallow me whole. And then it did. Player 045, stand! My breath caught, a sharp, choking inhale that felt like swallowing glass. My limbs felt paralyzed, as if invisible hands were gripping them, pulling me back, rooting me to the spot. Move! Move! You idiot! My brain screamed at me, a frantic, primal command, but my body refused to obey, locked in the cold embrace of sheer terror. A cold sweat clung to my skin, an icy film that made my leather jacket feel like a tomb. My pulse hammered erratically in my ears, a violent, deafening thump, thump, thump that drowned out all other sounds. Somehow, I forced myself to my feet, each muscle protesting, screaming in protest. My legs felt like they belonged to someone else, someone moments away from execution. The circle around me was deathly silent, a vacuum where sound, hope, and mercy had been stripped away. All eyes were on me, but not with sympathy, not with encouragement, only with the quiet, knowing acceptance of someone watching the next offering being dragged to the altar. Another soul delivered to the hungry maw. It was a familiar feeling, this cold isolation, this sense of being alone in the face of insurmountable evil. It was the legacy of Sycamore Grove. I began to walk. Each step was like a drum beat against my skull, echoing in the hollow space between my ears. The weight of every choice, every decision I might make, was suffocating, pressing down on me, making it hard to breathe. This was it. My turn to condemn, my turn to run. I passed Mina. Our eyes met for the briefest second, a flicker of something unreadable in her gaze. I can't choose her. The thought was immediate, instinctive, a foolish, almost suicidal impulse born from that stubborn, unwelcome conscience that always seemed to get me into trouble. She knew something. She might be my only way out. Or perhaps I just didn't want to be the one to seal her fate. My fatal flaw, rearing its ugly head. I kept moving. The tension in the air was unbearable. A taut wire stretched to breaking point. Every player I passed flinched slightly, their bodies tensing, bracing for impact, for the brush of my hand, for the death sentence to be uttered. Their fear was a palpable thing, a scent in the air, a physical pressure. I could feel their desperate hope that it wouldn't be them, and the insidious, guilty relief when I passed them by. I hesitated. My hand hovered, trembling almost imperceptibly, above a head, then another. The choices were terrible, impossible. Each face was a life, a story, about to be cut short by my hand. It was the same sickening calculus I'd performed countless times in my head since Sycamore Grove. The choices I'd made, or failed to make, that had cost so much. My stomach churned. Then, I lifted my hand. A decision was made, arbitrary yet final. I tapped a man's shoulder. "Goose!" For a heartbeat, nothing happened. The world seemed to hold its breath. Then, his eyes darkened, shifting from desperate hope to pure, unadulterated terror. His muscles coiled, tensed for flight. He ran. My feet exploded into motion, a desperate, animalistic surge of adrenaline. I pushed off, my worn boots squeaking against the rubber floor, my breath tearing in my throat. I heard the man gaining on me, his breath harsh, ragged, his steps unrelenting, a relentless drumbeat of pursuit. He was close, too close. I could almost feel the heat of his desperation at my back. This was it. Kill or be killed. Run or be eliminated. The choice was stark, brutal. I dove for the seat, a desperate lunge, my muscles screaming in protest. A hand grabbed my wrist, cold, strong, and sickeningly familiar. Mina. She yanked me down, a sudden but a powerful tug that sent me sprawling, just as the floor beneath the man vanished with that awful, familiar whoosh. He was gone. She saved me. She saved me from becoming the hunter, saved me from the grim satisfaction of claiming the seat. My stomach twisted with a mixture of relief and a lingering, sick dread. She leaned in close, her voice barely above a whisper, a strange intensity in her eyes. "You need to start asking the right questions." The way she said it, the way she looked at me, a direct, knowing gaze that seemed to pierce through my layers of cynicism and self-preservation, sent a fresh, cold shiver down my spine. What does she know? The question echoed in my mind, unsettling and urgent. It wasn't just a game to her, it was something more. Something she understood in a way I couldn't yet grasp. Her calmness, her calculated movements, her very presence were all a puzzle I hadn't even begun to solve. The next round began, the mechanical voice resuming its chilling announcements. My breath was still unsteady, my pulse erratic. But my attention was drawn back to the game, to the relentless, unforgiving rhythm of death. Another name was called. "Player 027, Stan?" Mina rose. The way she moved, calm, deliberate, almost graceful, contrasted sharply with the fear-stricken hesitation of the others before her. There was no trembling in her hands, no hesitation in her steps. She walked the circle like she'd done it 1,000 times before, like she already knew exactly how this would play out, a veteran of unseen battles. She moved like someone who was already living on the other side of fear. She tapped someone. The thwack was crisp, decisive. "Goose!" The chase began. But Mina didn't just run. She moved like a shadow slipping between cracks in reality, like water flowing through a sieve. Her feet barely seemed to touch the ground, her strides calculated, her speed almost unnatural. She didn't just evade, she anticipated. Her pursuer lunged, but it was useless. She was already moving before he could react, a ghost in motion. The moment stretched, but she never lost control, never faltered. Her every movement was precise, economical, terrifyingly efficient. Then, just like that, it was over. She slid into her seat, a whisper of rubber against fabric, her breathing measured, her expression unreadable. Her opponent was gone before he could even scream, swallowed by the floor with the same silent efficiency. A cold knot tightened in my stomach. That was too fast, too effortless, too practiced. It confirmed my suspicion. Mina was either more than she seemed, or she'd endured things that had honed her into a weapon. The Sycamore Grove incident had done something similar to me, sharpening my senses, twisting my perspective. Had she experienced something equally horrific? Mina barely glanced at the empty space where her pursuer stood. Instead, her gaze, sharp and knowing, turned toward me, a silent question in her eyes. And for the first time since I'd stepped into this nightmare, I didn't just see another player fighting to survive. I saw someone who might know exactly how this game ends. The game was far from over, and neither, I suspected, was Mina's story. Only a few of us would leave this room alive. But what if I wasn't one of them? The thought gnawed at me, relentless and merciless, like a starving dog. My chest tightened as I imagined the alternative, my body lying among the others, lifeless, discarded, another forgotten casualty in this twisted game. I should have never come here. I should have stayed home. I should have listened to my sister's pleas, should have held on to my mother's hand a little longer. The familiar pangs of regret, the ghostly echoes of a past I couldn't quite grasp, surged through me. My fatal flaw, the reluctant conscience, the cursed desire to fix something, had led me here. But regrets meant nothing now. Here, in this frozen chamber of death, only one thing mattered: survival. Just survival. The grim, unending imperative of my life. A voice devoid of any emotion, devoid of any humanity, echoed from unseen speakers above. Its mechanical cadence sliced through the humid air. Welcome, players, to the next round. Today's game is called Blind Man's Bluff. My stomach clenched, a violent spasm. The name sounded childish, almost playful, a cruel irony, but I knew better. Nothing in this place was innocent. The air around me felt colder, the kind of cold that seeped into your bones, leaving a gnawing emptiness inside. I swallowed hard, my throat dry as dust, the silence stretching like an invisible force pressing down on my chest. My breath was shallow, each inhale laced with the metallic tang of blood and something else, something decayed, something ancient and lingering just beneath the surface. A twisted game, a trap dressed as entertainment, an invitation to slaughter hidden behind a child's pastime. I wrapped my arms around myself, not for warmth, but to remind myself I was still here, still breathing. The others stood still, shadows frozen in the dim light, waiting, knowing the rules of this nightmare would soon be rewritten in blood. Half of the players will be blindfolded. The other half will see but can only use their voices to guide their blind teammates. The only way to escape is to reach the exit at the far end of the chamber. However, be warned. A chilling silence lingered, deliberately held, allowing the words to sink in, to ferment into pure dread. My body stiffened, every muscle tensing as the weight of the pronouncements fully registered. Blindfolded? Traps? Only 5 survivors? The walls felt like they were closing in, the cold creeping deeper into my bones, into the marrow itself. My breathing became shallow, rapid, inefficient. There was no way to prepare for something like this. No strategy, no prior experience that could possibly apply. I didn't even know where to start. My fingers twitched, as if searching for something, anything that might give me a sense of control. But there was nothing, just darkness, just fear. My mind raced through the possibilities, each one ending in the same brutal certainty: death, no escape, no mercy. The realization pressed down on me like a suffocating void, and for the first time in a long while, I felt truly helpless. The utter, complete absence of control. It was the same feeling I had when the fire had raged around me in Sycamore Grove. The same crushing impotence. There are traps along the way. Some will cut you down in an instant, while others will play with you, letting you suffer before death claims you. The deeper you go, the deadlier they become. The walls will shift, paths will collapse, and what once was safe will become a death sentence. The air itself may betray you, laced with unseen poisons. Choose wisely who you trust, for even your allies may be your executioners. And remember, only 5 of you will survive. The moment the last word ended, the lights flickered violently, strobing once, twice, before dying completely. Total, absolute darkness. A black so profound it felt like a physical presence, a suffocating shroud that enveloped everything. Then, I felt something tighten against my face, the fabric rough and suffocating, pressing against my skin like the cold grasp of a phantom. It smelled faintly of dust and something metallic. My breathing turned shallow. Each inhale a tight, constricted wheeze. The air around me seemed heavier, thicker, as if unseen eyes were closing in, watching, waiting for me to falter. My fingers twitched, desperate to claw at the blindfold, to rip it away and see, but I knew better. Panic swelled inside me, a suffocating tide rising to meet the oppressive blackness. In this moment, I was nothing more than prey in a hunter's den, blind to the horrors lurking in the darkness. Shit, I'm one of the blindfolded. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Panic clawed at my chest, a desperate, living thing. My heart pounded against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. Darkness pressed in from all sides, suffocating, disorienting. I forced myself to breathe, to control the rising tide of fear, to focus. And then, chaos erupted. Screams split the air, raw and desperate, echoing off unseen walls like the cries of the damned. Each one a fresh stab of fear in my gut. The sickening sound of bodies colliding, the dull thud of fists meeting flesh, the unmistakable snap of bones shattering beneath relentless, unseen force. I heard a sharp metallic click somewhere to my left, the sickening prelude to something worse, followed by an ear-piercing shriek that curdled my blood. It wasn't just pain, it was terror, pure and unadulterated. The kind that came from knowing your life was being stolen from you piece by piece, limb by limb. The air turned thick, suffocating with the scent of fresh blood, that familiar, coppery tang that always heralded the end. Every noise around me was a cruel reminder that death was not a possibility here. It was a certainty, lurking in the darkness, waiting for its next victim, waiting for me. A trap. Someone just died. A thunderous crash erupted somewhere further in the chamber, followed by a chorus of panicked shouts, voices scrambling, desperate. The very walls seemed to tremble with the force of the impact. I heard hurried footsteps, frantic scrambling, a desperate attempt to flee, then another scream, cut short, drowned beneath the sickening crunch of something heavy slamming shut. A trap door? A crushing weight? The air was thick with fear, the scent of fresh blood mixing with the damp, pervasive cold. Voices rose in a frenzy, desperate whispers and curses bouncing off the unseen walls, each one a stark reminder of how fragile life was in this place. Somewhere ahead, metal grated against stone, a door, a shifting trap. My breath caught, held tight in my throat. The game had begun, and the room itself was alive, a monstrous entity, watching, waiting to devour its next victim. I froze, locked in a paralysis of terror. Move or die. My mind screamed at me to move, to act, but my body refused, a stubborn, terrified lump. The weight of the darkness felt suffocating, like a heavy shroud pressing against my skin. Every breath was laced with the acrid scent of fear and something far worse, blood, the metallic tang clinging to my tongue. My heart pounded so loudly I swore the others could hear it, a frantic drum against my ribs. Somewhere in the distance, a deep, guttural groan rose, something unnatural shifting in the shadows, something that didn't sound human. I bit my lip until I tasted blood, the pain a sharp anchor, forcing my trembling legs to move. I took one hesitant step, another. Each movement felt like walking into the jaws of an unseen beast. Each step a gamble. My hands stretched out, desperate for any sense of security, and my fingertips finally brushed against something solid, a wall, cold and unyielding. It grounded me for a second, a fleeting moment of tangible reality in the swirling chaos. But then, a whisper, faint and insidious, snaked through the darkness, a ghost of a voice murmuring my name. Leo. My blood ran cold. It wasn't my imagination. It couldn't be. This place played tricks. Yes, but not like this. And then, I heard it again, closer, sharper, more distinct. A low, guttural exhale, ragged and unnatural. So near that I felt the ghost of warmth brushing against my neck, sending a fresh wave of primal fear through me. My body locked up, ice rushing through my veins, freezing me in place. The whispers in the distance, the shouts of the other players, faded beneath the deafening pounding in my ears. A slow, deliberate creak echoed through the darkness, like something heavy shifting, like a door slowly opening just beyond reach. My breath caught. The weight of unseen eyes pressed down on me, suffocating, malicious, a palpable presence in the void. I clenched my fists, a tremor running through my fingers. I didn't know what was behind me, but I knew it was waiting, watching, and it wanted me to turn around. A breath, right behind me, too close. Someone was there, not a ghost, not a trick of the mind. Someone real. Instinct, honed by years of running, by the countless horrors I'd stumbled into, took over. I whirled around, my arm a blur, and swung, my fist connected with flesh. A face. There was a guttural grunt of pain, a choked gasp, but they didn't go down. A fist slammed into my ribs, a brutal, jarring impact. Pain exploded in my side, white hot and searing. I stumbled, gasping, the blow stealing the air from my lungs. Whoever this was, they were fast, strong, desperate. I lashed out again, a wild, desperate swing, my knuckles striking something hard. Bone, perhaps. They staggered back, a choked cough escaping their lips. I lunged forward, hands grasping wildly in the oppressive blackness, fingers scrabbling, finding purchase. My fingers wrapped around their throat, the soft, vulnerable flesh beneath my grasp. I squeezed. They struggled, thrashing, clawing at my arms, their nails raking against the leather of my jacket, then my skin. But I tightened my grip, holding on with a desperate, unyielding strength I didn't know I possessed. My breath was ragged, coming in tortured gasps. My heart was a war drum in my chest, pounding a frantic, bloody rhythm. A few agonizing seconds passed. Their movements weakened, growing sluggish, less forceful. Then slowly, terrifyingly, they went still. Yet, the silence that followed was not comforting. It was suffocating, heavy, as if the air itself was waiting for something else to happen, for the next horror to manifest. My hands remained locked around their throat, fingers trembling, unwilling to release, unwilling to break the connection to the life I'd just extinguished. Then, the realization slammed into me like a sledgehammer, a sickening, soul-deep blow. I had just killed someone, not in self-defense, not in a moment of detached, calculated survival, but in raw, unfiltered panic. My breath caught in my throat as the heat of their blood seeped into my skin, warm and thick, sickeningly viscous. The metallic scent clinging to the back of my throat, churning my stomach, making bile rise. My hands, my arms, everything was sticky with it. I tried to wipe it off, a futile, frantic gesture, but it only smeared, a grotesque, indelible reminder of what I'd done. My breath stuttered, catching in ragged gasps. My vision blurred, not from tears, but from the dizzying rush of horror and adrenaline overtaking me. My heart was hammering, so loud I could barely hear the distant, low creak that slithered through the darkness, like the slow, deliberate opening of a massive, unseen door. A sound I shouldn't be hearing, a sound that meant something else was moving, watching, judging. The shadows around me felt alive, pressing in, suffocating me, a tangible weight on my chest. I swallowed hard, gripping my chest as I forced my lungs to take in air. But the air was heavy, thick with death, with the stench of fear and gore. I blinked down at the lifeless bodies sprawled beneath me, the wide, vacant eyes staring into nothing, into the same black void that now enveloped me. I wanted to look away. I couldn't. This place was alive, and it knew what I had done. It approved. They're dead. Just another name to add to the growing list of casualties that clung to my memory like barnacles to a hull. I pushed the body away, the contact still sickeningly intimate, and knelt, my hands fumbling, patting them down. My fingers trembled as they brushed against cold, clammy skin, slick with fresh blood. My breath caught when I felt something unexpected, movement, a final weak twitch, a dying spasm. My stomach churned, and for a fleeting, terrifying moment, I swore I heard a whisper, gargled, broken, pleading, then silence, utter, complete silence from the body. My hands kept searching, desperate for a weapon, a tool, anything. And finally, my fingers grasped something solid, a knife. The handle was cold, smooth, familiar. But just as my fingers closed around the handle, a sharp, metallic scrape echoed through the darkness. A sound I shouldn't be hearing. A sound that meant someone, or something, was still here. A whisper, thin and reedy, reached my ears through the cacophony of my own racing thoughts and the distant screams. "Leo, is that you?" I froze, my hand tightening on the knife. That voice, my mind raced. A split second of disbelief, then a surge of dread. Mina! This place was not kind to familiarity. Nothing should feel familiar here. My heart clenched as conflicting emotions surged through me. A flicker of desperate hope, immediately overshadowed by suspicion. What if it's a trick? What if this place was using my memories, my fleeting attachments, against me, just as it seemed to exploit every other weakness? I opened my mouth, but hesitated, caught between the desperate need for connection and the deep-seated paranoia that had become my default setting. The darkness was thick, pressing in, making me feel trapped in something much bigger than just this game, something ancient and malevolent. Mina. We had survived the first game together. We'd had each other's backs ever since, a grudging, unspoken alliance born of shared horror. She was the only one I could remotely tolerate, the only one whose survival I had, foolishly, perhaps, begun to invest in. "I'm here," I whispered back, my voice barely audible, a ragged rasp. Footsteps approached, slow and careful, a soft shuffle on the unseen floor. Then a hand found my wrist, grasping it firmly. "It's me," Mina murmured, her voice laced with relief, but also a strange, quiet certainty. I can see. I wasn't blindfolded." Relief, sharp and sudden, washed over me, a physical current. I squeezed her hand, a desperate, silent confirmation, a single point of light in the overwhelming blackness. "We have to get out of here," I muttered, my voice still thick with the aftermath of my desperate kill. "There are traps everywhere, and worse, some of them are hunting the rest of us," she whispered back, her voice tight, confirming my worst fears. The implication was clear. The unseen horrors weren't just environmental hazards. They were active predators. I already knew that. Of course, this wasn't a game. It was a slaughterhouse, a carefully orchestrated culling. But something felt even worse than before, like the walls were closing in, like something unseen was shifting just beyond my line of sight, twisting the very fabric of reality. My gut twisted violently, a primal instinct screaming at me that survival wasn't just about avoiding traps and other players. There's something else lurking here, something that doesn't belong, something that isn't of this world. I could feel its presence, thick and suffocating, pressing against my chest like a weight I couldn't shake off. The sound of shuffling feet wasn't just from the other players. There was something more, something that didn't breathe, something that didn't belong to the living. My throat tightened. The darkness wasn't just hiding death, it was alive with it. "Stay close," I told her, my voice low and urgent. We moved together. Mina gripped my wrist tighter, her nails digging into my skin, a sharp, grounding pain. What if we don't make it? Her voice wavered, barely more than a whisper against the chaos surrounding us, the distant screams and crashes. I swallowed hard, my throat dry as dust. We don't have a choice. If we stop, we die. If we hesitate, we die. Keep moving. It was the mantra of my life, the grim, unyielding truth I had lived by since the fire. A sudden, sharp clang echoed in the darkness, jarringly close. A trap. Too close. My muscles seized up, and my breath caught in my throat. Mina stiffened beside me, her grip on my wrist tightening painfully. For a split second, the silence that followed was more terrifying than the screams that preceded it. A dreadful anticipation of what had just been unleashed. Then, a guttural growl. Low. Wet. Something massive shifted in the black void ahead. Heavy, deliberate steps drawing closer, growing louder. Not human steps. Run, I breathed. And we did. Mina hesitated for a fraction of a second, then nodded, a resolute, grim set to her jaw. All right, but promise me something. Leo, we both make it out of here. I forced a smile, a grimace more than anything. Despite the crushing tension and bone-deep fear, deal, but let's focus on surviving first. The words were hollow, a cheap promise I knew I couldn't guarantee. But in this place, even the pretense of a promise was a luxury. She squeezed my hand tighter, her nails digging in again. Right, let's move. A mechanical voice, devoid of emotion, sliced through the air again, startlingly loud. 7 minutes remaining. Mina tugged my arm, pulling me forward. Come on, I'll guide you. I let her lead, her hand a lifeline in the overwhelming darkness. Around us, chaos raged, a cacophony of shrieks, desperate cries, the sickening wet impact of flesh being torn apart, the crunch of bone. The air was thick with sweat and blood, the metallic tang clinging to my tongue like a film. Then something heavy crashed down nearby, a thunderous impact, followed by a gurgling scream that was abruptly silenced. A sickening crunch echoed through the space, and my stomach churned, bile rising in my throat. Mina tightened her grip on my wrist, her breathing ragged, shallow gasps. We need to keep moving, she whispered, her voice laced with raw terror. Every shadow seemed to twist and move, as if something was lurking just beyond the edges of my vision, waiting for us to make a mistake, to falter. Faster, I urged, but my voice wavered, a reedy sound that betrayed the fear sinking its claws deep into me. I knew that whatever was ahead might be even worse than what we left behind. It always was. Then, a blood-curdling scream, impossibly close, a sickening snap. Someone triggered a trap, another one down. We have to move faster, Mina urged, her voice sharp with fear, desperation. But just as she spoke, a heavy clang erupted from somewhere in the darkness, a metallic groan, like something shifting, resetting. My pulse spiked. It's too loud, too deliberate. Then, another sound, a wet, gurgling choke, followed by the unmistakable thud of a body hitting the floor. Someone just died. My throat tightened, constricting, making it hard to breathe. The room was changing, shifting around us like a living thing, like a vast, hungry organism. The walls groaned. The ground felt unstable, like it was deciding who would be next, who to swallow. I felt Mina's grip tighten on my wrist, her fingers digging in. Leo, something's wrong, she whispered, a desperate plea. And that's when I heard it, a low, crawling scrape, coming closer, a sound that seemed to defy the very laws of physics, a sound that wasn't human. It was right beside us. A shadow moved beside us, too close. Before I could react, before I could even process the sudden, terrifying shift in the air, something yanked me backward, a hand, cold and strong, clamping over my throat, cutting off my air. I choked, my lungs burning, thrashing instinctively. A heavy weight pinned me down, crushing the air from my chest. "Sorry," a voice hissed, rough and desperate, right in my ear, hot and stale against my skin. "I need to survive." I felt cold steel press against my skin, a sharp, undeniable point against my neck. A knife, the same kind of weapon I now carried. No, not like this, not after everything. I thrashed wildly, bucking, kicking, but they were stronger, fueled by their own desperate need to live. My lungs burned, screaming for oxygen. Mina was screaming my name, her voice distant, distorted, like it was coming through thick water. Move, fight, kill. The primal instincts roared in my brain, silencing everything else. Desperation surged through me, a primal, untamed beast. I drove my knee up into their ribs, hard. A sickening crack echoed through the darkness, followed by a sharp, gasping wheeze from my attacker. The force of the blow sent them reeling, a sudden, jerking movement, but their grip on me remained ironclad, unbreakable. My heart hammered wildly as I struggled against their hold, my vision blurring at the edges. Then, a guttural snarl erupted from their throat, raw and filled with desperate rage. They lunged again, pressing the blade harder against my skin. I barely reacted in time. Twisting my body, I threw my weight against them, using their own momentum, sending both of us crashing to the ground with a painful thud. My fingers scrabbled wildly against their arm, searching, finding the cold, slick handle of my stolen knife, the one I'd taken from the first body. My mind blanked, clearing of everything but the singular, brutal need. I swung. The blade buried itself deep into flesh, and a hot, wet spray splashed across my hands, my face sickeningly warm. The scent of iron flooded my senses, thick and suffocating, mingling with the sweat and fear. The gurgled groan from my attacker dissolved into a choked, dying whisper, a last, desperate sigh. Their body convulsed once, a final, shuddering spasm, then silence. Absolute, heavy silence from the body beneath me. My breath was ragged, coming in tortured gasps, my limbs trembling uncontrollably. The realization of what I'd done slammed into me with the weight of 1,000 stones, a fresh layer of grime on my soul. My stomach twisted violently, threatening to betray me. But there's no time for guilt, no time for hesitation. This wasn't the first time, and I knew, with a fatalistic certainty, it wouldn't be the last. A sound, low, wet, shifting, echoed from behind me. More were coming. Whatever that creature was, it was still out there, lurking, drawn by the scent of blood. I wiped my blade against my sleeve, the blood smearing, and forced myself up, my muscles screaming in protest. "Mina, we have to go. Now." Mina breathed heavily beside me, her own terror palpable, looking around into the oppressive blackness as if trying to pierce it with her gaze. "Leo, I don't want to die here." Her voice was a fragile whisper, a desperate plea that tugged at that cursed conscience of mine. I grabbed her shoulders, my fingers digging into her arms, trying to impart some of my desperate urgency into her. "We won't, but we have to move now. They're coming." She nodded, a flicker of determination hardening in her eyes, replacing the fear. "Then let's survive together." We ran. Every muscle in my body screamed for relief, for rest, for oblivion. But I pushed forward, my breath ragged and sharp. The countdown blared from the speakers above, a cruel, mocking reminder of our dwindling time. 10 seconds remaining. The path ahead was a blur, shifting, unstable, each step a gamble between survival and death. The sound of footsteps behind us grew louder, frantic, desperate. Someone else was running, desperate to reach the exit before time ran out. A shriek pierced the air, agonizingly close, then cut off abruptly. Another one fell. 5 seconds remaining. My legs burned, fire raging in my quads and hamstrings. My heart pounded against my ribs like a trapped animal, threatening to burst. The final stretch was just ahead. The door, a faint outline of less dark in the overwhelming black, loomed, slightly ajar, a sliver of impossible hope. Almost there. 3. I grabbed Mina's wrist, my fingers closing around it like a vice, yanking her forward with all the remaining strength in my body. She stumbled, a gasp escaping her lips, but kept running, her steps faltering, but still moving. 2. A shadow moved beside me, faster than anything human. A whisper of motion I felt more than saw. A flash of steel, a glint of impossible light, a hand, claw-like, reaching. 1. The blaring horn echoed through the chamber, a deafening final note. My feet hit solid ground as I burst across the threshold, propelled by sheer will. My chest heaved, my vision spinning, the room lurching around me. The massive, unseen door slammed shut behind me with a final, resonant thud, vibrating through the floor. Silence, the terrifying, heavy silence of survival. I turned, my pulse still hammering, my body trembling violently from adrenaline and exhaustion. Mina, but she wasn't beside me. Panic, cold and sharp, gripped my chest like a vice, squeezing the air from my lungs. My breath caught, and I whipped around, scanning the dimly lit chamber, my eyes useless in the pervasive gloom. Mina! My voice cracked, raw with desperation, a sound I barely recognized as my own. My pulse was hammering so hard it drowned out everything else, a frantic, deafening roar in my ears. I rushed back toward the door, my hands trembling uncontrollably, pounding against the cold, unyielding metal, desperate to open it, to go back, to find her. Mina, where are you? Silence, only the thudding of my own heart, a sinking feeling, cold and heavy, coiled in my gut, a nauseating certainty. No, 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 no. She was right there. I had her hand. I had her. Then, a faint sound, a muffled groan, thin and weak, from somewhere near my feet. My head snapped toward it, a desperate surge of hope mixed with dread. Mina! I stumbled forward, fear clawing at my throat, threatening to choke me. Leo, I'm here. Her voice was weak, strained, a mere breath. I dropped to my knees beside her, my hands fumbling in the darkness. She was on the ground, a crumpled heap, her face pale even in the gloom, pain flickering in her eyes like dying embers. Her leg, blood was pooling beneath her, a dark, growing stain against the concrete, a deep, sickening crimson. You're hurt, I whispered, my voice shaking, choked with a sudden, overwhelming wave of guilt and protectiveness. That damn conscience. She forced a small, weak smile, a brave, fragile thing. But I'm alive. We made it. Almost. Tears stung my eyes, hot and sharp, but I blinked them away fiercely. There was no time for tears. I clutched her hands, cold and clammy, gripping them tight. We're getting out of here. Both of us. The speakers crackled above, that cold, merciless voice returning, cutting through the silence, a death knell. Survivors confirmed. Prepare for the next round. I grit my teeth, rage and fear intertwining in a bitter knot in my gut. Whatever fresh hell came next, I wouldn't let go of her. I wouldn't lose her. Not after all this, not after everything, because now we fight for more than just survival. We fight for each other, total characters, excluding spaces, 90763. The sound wasn't just a sound, it was a physical blow, a concussive wave that struck the very marrow of my bones. It rattled the fillings in my teeth, vibrated the worn leather of my jacket, and turned the air around me into a living, howling thing. The tent, half collapsed, writhed like a dying animal, its synthetic skin snapping in a wind that wasn't there. My hands, numb with a fear that tasted like old copper and ozone, fumbled with the last tent pole. My eyes fixed on the distant lake, where the thing that made the noise was, or had been, churning the ancient waters, sending echoes of pure, primordial terror bouncing off the unforgiving rock faces. This was it. This was the moment I finally broke, or at least, the moment I finally accepted that breaking was just another Tuesday. But of course, it hadn't started with the world coming apart at the seams. It never did. It always began subtly, a ripple in the calm, an off-key note in the mundane symphony of existence. This time, it began with a yearning for silence and a road that twisted deeper into a forgotten corner of the world, leading me straight into the maw of something I couldn't comprehend, yet instantly recognized. The road to Whispering Pines Lake was less a road and more suggestion, a narrow ribbon of cracked asphalt unspooling through a forest that seemed to actively resent its intrusion. I'd seen plenty of trees in my time, more than any man should, driving the late shifts, chasing the next paycheck and the next anonymous town. But this forest, this was different. Not just dense, but impenetrable. The kind of density that swallowed sunlight and sound, that made you feel like you were venturing into a maw rather than just driving through a state park. Pine needles, thick as a carpet, muffled the last whispers of the outside world, and the air itself seemed thicker, older, heavy with the scent of damp earth and something indefinable, something ancient. My beat-up pickup, reliable but weary, ate up the miles, its engine a low thrum against the oppressive quiet. I kept my hand on the steering wheel, my thumb tracing the worn leather, and occasionally, without thinking, my other hand would drift to my left wrist, my fingers finding the cool, smooth glass of my old analog watch. Not to check the time, I rarely cared what time it was anymore, but just for the tactile reassurance of its familiar weight, a small, mechanical certainty in a life that offered none. I was on the run again, not from any specific person, but from the cumulative weight of everything I'd seen, everything that followed me like a persistent shadow, a few weeks slinging boxes in a warehouse, a few more guarding a vacant lot, and the walls had started to feel too thin, the shadows too long. So, I packed my 2 duffels, one with clothes, the other, the go bag, always ready with cash, a heavy mag light, and a first aid kit, and pointed the truck north. Whispering Pines Lake promised solitude, cheap camping, and a place where the noise in my head might finally, mercifully, quiet down for a few days. Fool's hope. I knew. It always was. The campsite itself was what you'd expect. A cleared patch of dirt, a fire ring, and a picnic table scarred with decades of initials and clumsy declarations of love. It felt small, almost insignificant, swallowed whole by the towering evergreens that stood like silent, disapproving sentinels. I didn't bother with a fire ring, just enough space for my 2-man tent, a place to pull my sleeping bag, and a few hours of uneasy sleep. The air, even in the early afternoon, carried a chill that bit sharper than it should have, seeping into the marrow, a cold that had nothing to do with temperature. I shivered, tugging my worn leather jacket tighter around me. "Great, Leo," I muttered, my voice rough from disuse. "Another 5-star resort. Hope they have room service for the existential dread." After wrestling the tent into a semblance of structure, a task that always felt absurdly domestic given the nature of my life, I decided to scout the lake. The idea was to find a quiet spot, maybe try to fish. Not that I was much of a fisherman, but it was an activity that required quiet, stillness, and an illusion of normalcy. Anything to drown out the internal monologue for a few hours. The truck rumbled to life, the sound comforting in its mechanical predictability compared to the unsettling silence of the forest. The lake access point was a short drive, down a winding dirt road that quickly narrowed, the trees pressing in, their branches scratching against the truck's sides like skeletal fingers. When I finally reached the small, gravel parking area, a low sense of unease, a familiar hum beneath my skin, started to prickle. The lot was empty. Not surprising for a weekday, I reasoned, but the emptiness here felt different, too empty. Like the world had collectively decided to avoid this particular patch of wilderness. A narrow path, choked with pine needles and loose rocks, led down to the shoreline. The lake itself spread out before me, a vast, dark mirror reflecting the bruised sky. It was shaped like a massive bowl, rimmed by steep, forested hills that rose sharply into jagged, snow-dusted peaks. Beautiful. Yes, in a stark, unforgiving way. But the beauty felt hungry, like something was always waiting just beyond the tree line. My hand went to my watch again, my thumb pressing down on the crown. My go bag was still in the truck, but the mag light was in my jacket pocket, a familiar, comforting weight. Always be prepared to run. I walked to a small ledge, a natural outcropping of rock just off the main trail. It was secluded, offering a good view of the lake's expanse. I unfolded my battered camping chair, the cheap plastic groaning in protest, and set about rigging a fishing rod that had seen better days. The quiet was absolute, broken only by the gentle lapping of water against the shore and the distant, almost imperceptible hum of insects. It was the kind of quiet that pressed in on you, that felt too heavy, too complete, like the world was holding its breath. I kept glancing up, scanning the opposite shore, the tree line, an instinct born of too many nights spent looking over my shoulder. Years of running had honed my senses to a knife's edge. I noticed the way the light fell through the canopy in a specific, almost artificial way, the subtle shift in the air temperature that had nothing to do with the sun dipping lower. The sun, a bruised orange orb, began its slow descent, painting the western peaks in shades of deep violet and blood red. I watched it, my mind drifting, trying to empty itself of the usual parade of horrors and anxieties. For a brief, fleeting moment, there was just the hum of the reel, the quiet pull of the line, and the vast, indifferent beauty of the lake. Then it came, a sound. Not a sound, exactly. A presence. A long, drawn-out, booming moan ripped through the silence, echoing across the vast expanse of the lake. It was sudden, brutal. One moment, absolute stillness. The next, the very air vibrated with a sound so deep, so profound, it seemed to originate from the deepest strata of the earth itself. It lasted for what felt like an eternity, perhaps 5 or 6 seconds, before abruptly, horrifyingly, cutting off. The silence that followed was even worse, pregnant with the aftershocks of that terrible noise. The moan bounced back and forth, a disembodied wail ricocheting off the bowl of hills, lasting a good 2 seconds longer than the original sound had. My eardrums throbbed, a dull ache settling deep within my skull. The world seemed to tilt, my chair rocking slightly, though I knew it was only my perception. I froze, my hand still on the fishing reel, my breath caught in my throat. My heart, a veteran of countless panics, began to hammer against my ribs with a renewed, frantic rhythm. It was the sound of a wail in agony, magnified 1,000 times, pulled from the crushing depths and forced into the thin, indifferent air of the surface world. Only there were no whales here, not in this landlocked pocket of despair. Something immense, something utterly beyond human comprehension, had just compressed and released every cubic foot of air in this entire valley. The pressure was palpable, a physical weight on my chest. "What the hell was that?" I whispered, my voice thin, reedy, utterly alien in the vast quiet. The question hung in the air, unanswered, mocked by the echo of the moan. I waited, straining my ears, subconsciously urging the sound to return, to offer some clue, some tangible form, so my mind could categorize it, dismiss it. But nothing came. Only the infuriating, oppressive silence. I tried to chuckle, a dry, rasping sound that died in my throat. Joking about it was an old habit, a defense mechanism, but it felt hollow here, a cheap suit of armor against something far too big. My heart, despite my attempts at cynical dismissal, was still doing a frantic tango against my sternum. My gaze swept the lake, then the tree line, searching, desperately searching for some explanation. A large animal, a landslide, some bizarre geological phenomenon. My brain, ever the diligent, desperate rationalizer, spun through possibilities, rejecting each one as inadequate. This wasn't a deer. This wasn't a falling rock. This was other. I decided with the cold, clear logic of a man who'd seen too much that it was time to pack it in. Fishing was overrated anyway. I reeled in my line, the monofilament whispering a fragile farewell to the dark water. As I started to dismantle the rod, carefully, methodically, trying to calm the tremor in my hands, a low, persistent hum began to vibrate through the ground. It wasn't a sound I heard with my ears, not exactly. It was a resonance, a frequency that bypassed the auditory canal and went straight for the bone. The booming moan came again. This time, I was ready, or as ready as a man can be for the sound of the world ending. My tackle box, sitting open on the rock beside me, rattled violently. The assorted hooks, lures, and sinkers jumped, clattering against the plastic, a miniature earthquake in a box. It wasn't a gust of wind. The air was still, heavy. This was a concussive force, a vibration passing through the very earth beneath me, the very air I breathed. My head snapped up, my eyes scanning the opposite shore of the lake, already knowing what I would see, the tree line, impossibly far away, blurred. And then, for a split second, I saw it, or something, a flash of lighter color, something immense and indistinct, breaking through the dense canopy. It was too big for any known animal, too fluid for a rock slide. The trees around it swayed heavily, impossibly, or like giant reeds caught in a hurricane. Though no wind stirred the air around me, they bent and swayed, bowing to some unseen, colossal force, looking as if they might snap and fall into the water. But they didn't. They simply thrashed, then slowly, agonizingly slowly, settled back into their suffocating stillness, a silent testament to the monstrous thing that had just passed through them. Another booming moan. This one was closer, louder, deeper. It didn't just echo, it rippled. The surface of the lake, once a placid mirror, began to dance with small, short, concentric rings, as if a gigantic invisible hand had just pressed down on the water and then released it. It was like watching sand vibrate on a speaker plate, except the plate was the size of a lake, and the entire surface was disturbed. My teeth chattered, my vision blurred, and a blinding headache flared behind my eyes. The sound must have contained elements far below the human hearing range, a subsonic bass note that bypassed the ears and went straight for the guts. If it hadn't, if the full auditory assault had reached my ears, my eardrums would have burst, leaving me deaf, probably insane. My survival instincts, honed to a cruel perfection over years of running, took over. There was no discussion, no deliberation, just raw, animalistic flight. I didn't bother packing anything neatly. The fishing rod, the tackle box, the chair, everything was thrown haphazardly into a single, frantic pile. My mind screamed, "Get out! Now!" I stumbled back up the narrow path, my feet slipping on the loose gravel, my eyes still darting to the lake, expecting to see some colossal, tentacled horror rise from the depths. My heart was a frantic drum solo in my chest, a desperate, deafening rhythm that threatened to drown out all other thought. The truck, my old dented sanctuary, loomed ahead. I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking so violently I almost dropped them. The driver's side door creaked open, a sound that grated on my hypersensitive nerves. As I threw my gear onto the passenger seat, another pair of headlights cut through the gloom, pulling into the gravel lot. Two men, both older than me, emerged from a newer, shinier pickup, their faces etched with the easygoing calm of weekend warriors. Fishermen, probably, for a brief, irrational moment. The sight of other people, normal people, brought a sliver of relief. Maybe I wasn't losing my mind. Maybe it was just something explainable, a bear, a trick of the light. My old brain, trying to cling to sanity, desperate for a mundane explanation. They caught my eye. Two easygoing nods. I nodded back, probably looking like a wide-eyed lunatic, my face pale, sweat beading on my forehead despite the chilling air. Then the boom sounded again. This time it was unmistakably closer, and the sound of it, if it was possible, felt even more physical. The truck I was leaning against vibrated violently, the windows rattling in their frames, the metal groaning. I could hear it now, distinctly, under the low-frequency moan. The sound of water churning, a vast, unseen engine grinding beneath the surface of the lake, straining under some immense, impossible pressure. I jumped, my head hitting the roof of the truck, but I barely registered the pain. The two fishermen who had just started pulling their gear from the back of their own truck froze, their faces, once easygoing, contorted into masks of pure, unadulterated terror. One of them dropped his cooler, a cascade of ice and soda bottles scattering across the gravel. Without a second thought, I scrambled into my cab, slammed the door, and twisted the key in the ignition. The engine coughed once, then roared to life, a blessed, deafening noise that momentarily drowned out the primordial wail. I slammed the shifter into reverse, backing out of the parking spot with a screech of tires on gravel, then slammed it into drive. As I fishtailed onto the narrow dirt road, kicking up a cloud of dust, I glanced in my rearview mirror. The two fishermen were already scrambling, stuffing their gear back into their truck with frantic, clumsy movements, their faces stark white in the dimming light. The moan, a lingering ghost, finally faded as I sped away, leaving them to their own personal horror show. My conscience, that damned, nagging part of me, pricked at me. Should I have warned them? Should I have waited? I pushed it down. No. Every second wasted was a second closer to whatever that was. And in my experience, the only thing that followed these sounds was trouble and death. The drive back to the main road, which had taken 10 minutes of cautious winding on the way in, now felt like an eternity. My fingers drummed a frantic, nervous rhythm on my thigh, a relentless beat against the thudding panic in my chest. I'd read about it years ago, in some dusty medical journal in a motel lobby. Infrasound, super low frequency sounds, below the threshold of human hearing, capable of inducing intense feelings of dread, panic, even terror, capable of making the very air around you feel wrong, heavy with an unseen presence. I was convinced, with a cold certainty that settled deep in my bones, that this was what was happening to me. It wasn't just my mind playing tricks, it was a physical assault. My body was reacting to something that my ears couldn't fully process, but my primal instincts screamed a danger. I thought I heard another moan, a faint, rattling tremor that shook the windows of the truck, vibrated the steering wheel in my hands. But it was fleeting, a phantom limb of sound. It could have been the wind, or the rough road, or just the fear, twisting my perceptions. My grip on the wheel tightened, my knuckles white. My gaze flickered to the rearview mirror, then to the side mirrors, expecting to see some titanic, impossible shape looming in the fading light. But there was nothing, only the oppressive, silent trees. My campsite, a mere 10 minutes from the lake by the winding, speed-limited road, felt dangerously close now. Too close. I could still see a sliver of the lake's dark surface through the trees from my tent spot, a constant, nagging reminder of what lay waiting. As soon as the truck lurched to a halt, I knew there was no staying, no trying to sleep this off. My heart, still racing like a trapped bird, wouldn't stop. It was a unilateral decision made in the space of a single breath. Get out. Now. I killed the engine, plunging the small clearing into a sudden, terrifying silence. My hand immediately went to my watch, my thumb tracing the cold metal of the bezel, a desperate plea for normalcy. Then, moving with a speed born of pure, distilled fear, I unzipped the tent. The air inside was stale, oppressive. My sleeping bag, a faded olive-drab rectangle of synthetic comfort, was rolled and tossed into the truck bed in seconds. My sparse belongings followed. Just as I was wrestling with the aluminum poles, trying to collapse the tent's flimsy frame, it came again. A moan. Less intense, perhaps, than the ones I'd heard by the lake, but no less terrifying. This one was unequivocally from the lake, echoing up the mountainside, a mournful, agonizing bellow. The sound seemed to cling to the air, to the very fabric of the trees, rattling around the bowl of the valley for an impossibly long time. It didn't just echo, it reverberated, a wave of sonic dread that refused to dissipate. Usually, the dense forest would absorb and dampen such sounds, but this one seemed to feed on the very air, growing, twisting, until it slowly, agonizingly, wore itself out. If you were floating underwater, in the abyssal dark, and some titanic, impossibly sharp spear had been plunged into the side of a colossal whale, twisting in its flesh, the water would sound like what I heard, a primal boom as the water compacted, followed by a raw, desperate tinge of pain on the fringes, resulting in a higher, almost keening pitch. And if you were deep, near the black floor of the ocean, you'd hear it bounce back at you again, a shadow of the sound but still equally horrifying, a ghostly echo of agony. This was that sound, translated to the land, amplified to an impossible scale, and aimed directly at my soul. "No," I rasped, my voice barely a whisper. "Not today. Not here." I grabbed the collapsed tent fabric, a pathetic heap of nylon and aluminum, and simply smashed the whole thing into the truck bed, not bothering to fold it, not bothering with buckles or straps. It was a single, desperate, chaotic act. Then I threw myself into the cab, slamming the door so hard the whole vehicle shuddered. The key was already in the ignition. The engine caught immediately, roaring to life, a cacophony of sound that felt like salvation. I didn't care about the speed limit, about anything but distance. I slammed the shifter into drive, the tires spitting gravel as the truck shot forward, leaving the haunted clearing behind. The engine was too loud to determine if the moan was still lingering, if the unseen thing was still bellowing its primordial rage into the night. But the sheer, bone-deep panic it had induced, the primal, unshakable certainty that something ancient and terrible had stirred in those dark waters, made me utterly unwilling to stick around and investigate. My cynical facade had cracked, revealing the raw, bleeding fear underneath. Looking back, now, from the dubious safety of another nameless motel room, with the drone of the highway a distant, meaningless hum, a part of me wishes I had stayed, a dark, so morbid curiosity, a side effect of all the horrors I've witnessed, tugs at me. To truly see it, to understand what kind of unimaginable leviathan could make the very mountains groan. But that's the trauma talking, the slow creep of madness. At the time, in that moment, with the sound of the world ending echoing in my bones, I was happy, happier than I'd been in years, because I was leaving, because I was still, somehow, alive. The only victory I ever truly sought. 995 characters. The cold hit me first. A sudden, unnatural chill that seemed to seep into my bones long before I saw him. It wasn't the kind of crisp, invigorating air you get in autumn. This was a predatory cold, the kind that steals your breath and promises something worse. I was on my knees, knuckles raw, a jagged piece of brick digging into my palm, the metallic tang of blood a bitter counterpoint to the coppery smell of ozone clinging to the air around the man standing over me. His eyes, usually a placid, unsettlingly calm blue, were now chips of glacial ice, reflecting the distorted terror of my own face. A faint, almost imperceptible thrum vibrated through the cracked pavement, a sound I'd only ever heard before moments before the world decided to go sideways. His smile, when it came, was a razor-thin line, devoid of warmth, a chilling rictus that promised an end I didn't want to contemplate. My worn leather jacket, usually a shield, felt like tissue paper against the invisible force pressing me down. My hand, as if on autopilot, went to my old analog wristwatch, the cold metal a small, futile anchor in the maelstrom. It was then I saw them, unfolding from his back with a sound like tearing silk and splintering glass. Vast, intricate structures, feathered with a darkness that seemed to drink the meager streetlights. Pure black, veined with silver, catching the light in a way that defied physics. Beautiful, terrifying, and entirely, irrevocably real. The whole damn mess, as most of my messes did, started with a flat tire and a dwindling fuel gauge on a road that probably hadn't seen a repair crew since before my parents were born. The rusted Ford coughed its last wheezing breath outside a sign that read, "In faded, peeling paint. Welcome to Smithin. Population declining." I hadn't planned on stopping. I never planned on stopping anywhere for long. My life was a perpetual motion machine, a frantic, joyless dance across state lines, chasing the next anonymous paycheck and the illusory promise of forgetting. The trauma of Sycamore Grove, the fire, the things that had burned with my family. It was a scar I carried, a phantom limb that throbbed whenever I stayed too long in one place. I was a magnet for the unusual, a lightning rod for the horrific, and I knew it, so I kept moving. But Smithin had me. The town itself was a testament to neglect. Buildings sagged, paint peeled in long, leprous strips, and the air hung heavy with the smell of damp earth and something vaguely metallic, like rust or old blood. A diner with a flickering neon sign offered burnt coffee and questionable eggs, and a gas station that looked like it hadn't been updated since the Eisenhower administration boasted a single, wheezing air pump. I fixed the tire, topped off the tank, and, feeling the familiar pull of my empty wallet, decided to look for a quick night shift. Security guard, warehouse, anything that kept me out of the sun and away from prying eyes. That's how I met Brad. He ran the local general store, a sprawling, dusty place that smelled of mothballs and forgotten dreams. He was too handsome for Smithin, too polished, sharp suit, a smile that could disarm a bomb, and eyes that were a startling, vibrant blue. He had an apartment above the store, he said, and was looking for someone to cover the graveyard shift at the old cannery a few miles out of town. The last guy, he explained with a dismissive wave of his hand, had just moved on. I'd heard that one before. A lot of people moved on in my world, usually without leaving a forwarding address or a body. My internal alarm bells, rusted and half broken as they were, started to clang immediately. This guy was wrong. Not obviously wrong, not like Ethan, the smiling cannibal, or Olivia, the woman who wore human skin. Brad was subtle. It was in the way his smile didn't quite reach his eyes, in the sudden, almost imperceptible drop in temperature when he walked past, or the way the dust motes in the sunbeams seemed to swirl differently around him. My survivor's gaze, honed by years of being prey, picked up on it. He moved with an effortless grace that bordered on the unnatural, like a cat stretching, but with an underlying coiled tension that suggested immense, barely contained power. I took the job, of course. My wallet overruled my instincts, as it always did. And maybe, just maybe, that cursed, reluctant conscience that always seemed to get me into trouble whispered that something was simmering under Smithen's decaying surface, and I might just be in a position to see it. The cannery was a cavernous, echoing mausoleum of rusted machinery and stale fish air. Perfect. Isolated. Just me and the creaking pipes and the occasional scurrying rat. Brad would drop by sometimes, ostensibly to check on things, but his visits always left me on edge. He'd bring me lukewarm coffee in a chipped mug, his smile unwavering, and talk about the town, about the simple life. But then he'd drop a comment, a non sequitur, that would send a shiver down my spine. "People here are so predictable," he'd say, his eyes distant, "like puppets on strings." Or, "You know, the human body is surprisingly resilient, or perhaps surprisingly fragile, depending on your perspective." I remembered a cold evening, not long after I started the job. I was walking back from the diner, the smell of burnt grease still clinging to my jacket, when I heard a commotion a block away, a loud, slurred shout, then a high-pitched scream of pure agony. I ducked into an alley, my heart already hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I'd learned long ago not to rush towards screams. They rarely ended well for the curious. Peeking out, I saw a figure, hunched over, seemingly stuck to the pavement, their legs encased in what looked like a sheath of frost, even though the air wasn't that cold. Brad walked past them, not a flicker of concern on his face, whistling a jaunty tune. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod in my direction, as if he knew I was there, watching. My blood ran cold. A familiar sensation. The scream dragged me right back to that snow-choked mountain pass, to the memory of a dead man's impossible whisper, and the understanding that some horrors weren't just anomalies, but deliberate acts. Another time, later, it was a mugging. Not me directly, but I was passing by. 3 figures in the darkened street, one with a knife, a quick struggle, then a sickening wet thud. I saw Brad, a fleeting shadow, standing over the fallen mugger. He leaned in, whispered something, and then, with a flash of light, something glinted in his hand. A knife, but wrong. It was translucent, shimmering, catching the sparse streetlight like a sliver of solidified ice. He plunged it into the mugger's back. The man didn't even scream, just convulsed once and went limp. Brad pulled the knife out, and it dissolved into a puff of vapor, leaving no trace. He looked up, his gaze sweeping the street, settling on my hiding spot for a fraction of a second. A silent acknowledgement, a chilling warning. I pulled back deeper into the shadows, the memory of Olivia and her quiet, methodical cruelty bubbling up. The understanding that some monsters were infinitely more dangerous because they hid behind normal faces in ordinary streets. The wings. I saw them by accident. I was dropping off the weekly cannery report at Brad's apartment above the store. The door was ajar. I hesitated, my hand already reaching for my watch, a nervous tick. My conscience, that self-defeating impulse, decided I should probably knock, but my natural caution kept me from just walking in. I heard a rustle, like dry leaves skittering across pavement, but deeper, stronger, a guttural sigh. Then I saw it, through the narrow gap. Brad, shirtless, his back to me, and erupting from his shoulder blades, impossibly, were the wings. They were huge, easily spanning the width of the room, intricate, almost fractal in their design, shimmering with an inner light that seemed to shift between deep violet and midnight black. They folded and unfolded with a terrible grace, rippling like muscle under skin, that, as he stretched, they simply reabsorbed, a ripple across his back, and they were gone, leaving only flawless, unblemished skin. My breath caught in my throat. I backed away silently, heart hammering, the chilling knowledge of what I'd seen a lead weight in my gut. This wasn't some minor parlor trick. This was something ancient, powerful, and utterly alien, like the things that clung to the walls in that apartment building, shifting, observing, waiting. Brad seemed to know I'd seen them. He never brought it up directly, but his demeanor subtly changed. The casual charm still flickered, but underneath it, a new layer of possessiveness, of control, began to emerge. His visits to the cannery became more frequent, his eyes lingering on me a little too long. Then came the cold, not the external chill he projected, but an internal one, a sickness that seemed to seep into his very being. His normally placid demeanor fractured. The subtle wrongness sharpened into overt menace. Sometimes he'd be his usual charming self, offering me coffee, asking about my day. Other times the switch would flip, his face would harden, his eyes would turn glacial, and he'd say things that tightened the knot of dread in my stomach. "You know," he'd intone, his voice like ice-crusted steel, "I could kill you easily, and in such a way that they would never find your body. I'm much more powerful than you give me credit for. Vance, one day, I will show you this. Just hope I'm in a good mood that day and decide to let you live." He never laid a hand on me, not then, but the implicit threat hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. It was worse than a punch. It was a promise of utter annihilation, a casual declaration of ultimate power. My mind flashed back to the NDE, to the farm of cosmic horrors, to the unsettling truth that some beings simply viewed humanity as livestock. And Brad, with his detached cruelty, seemed to embody that same terrifying indifference. Sometimes, I'd wake in my own rented room, a cheap, moldy-smelling box in a boarding house, to find him standing over me in the middle of the night, just standing there, perfectly still, staring down into my face. His eyes would be glassy, devoid of recognition, like polished stones. I'd lie there, paralyzed, my hand instinctively going for the worn leather of my jacket draped over the chair, a futile comfort. It wasn't love that kept me there. No, my capacity for that had been burned out long ago. It was pure, unadulterated fear, and that damn stubborn conscience. Because people started going missing. First it was just one, an old man who frequented the diner. Then a young woman who worked at the gas station. Then more. The town, perpetually rotting, now began to hum with a low, desperate panic. Posters went up. Police, sleepy and out of their depth, mumbled about drifters and runaways. I knew better. My experiences, my cursed existence, had taught me that when normal explanations failed, the answer was always something worse, something beyond the veil. The dread gnawed at me, a constant, low-frequency hum behind my thoughts. I wanted to run, to pack my go bag, to disappear into the anonymity of the highway. But the faces on the missing posters, the quiet terror in the townspeople's eyes, it pulled at me, like the faint cry of a lost dog. It stirred something that I wish was dead. Brad, meanwhile, seemed to grow stronger, his strange mood swings becoming more pronounced, his presence more unsettling. And the things around the general store, they started appearing. Little things at first, a cheap plastic wristwatch on a dusty shelf that hadn't been there the day before, an old Massa scratched pair of reading glasses on the counter, nestled between tins of peaches, a child's hair clip on the floor behind the register. They were never explained. Brad never asked me about them. They just appeared. Trophies. It was the only word for it. Each one a tiny, chilling monument to another vanished life. Like Olivia's macabre collection, a grim testament to the predator's success. It solidified the terrifying truth in my mind. Brad wasn't just a weird guy with a bad temper and supernatural powers. He was a monster, a true fairy, in the old, dark sense of the word. And he was hunting, last night, The phone rang in the boarding house. The landlady, a thin, perpetually worried woman named Agnes, knocked on my door, her face ashen. Her younger brother, she said, had gone to the grocery store hours ago and hadn't come back. He was a good man, a veteran. Agnes insisted, never missed a beat. He wouldn't just leave. I nodded, a cold dread already settling in my gut. I knew he wouldn't. He couldn't. This morning, I found it. On the coffee table in Brad's apartment, nestled amongst the usual clutter of receipts and old newspapers, sat a tarnished, slightly bent army badge. Engraved on it, almost too small to read, were the initials RM. Agnes's brother's name was Robert Miller. My blood ran cold, colder than Brad's touch, colder than a winter grave. This wasn't some random disappearance. This was personal now. This was right here, in Brad's lair, staring me in the face. The casual cruelty of it, leaving the badge out in the open, was a statement, a threat, a challenge. My heart hammered, a frantic drumbeat against my ribs. My hand went to my watch, a futile gesture. Brad's cold, unsettling voice from the previous night echoed in my ears. One day I will show you this. This was it. This was the moment. The reluctant conscience, my fatal flaw, twisted in my gut. I could run. I had my go bag, the keys to the Ford, enough gas to get me out of Smithin and never look back. But the badge, Robert Miller's badge, seemed to mock me. Another victim, another person I could have, should have, tried to save. My mind screamed at me to flee, but something deeper, something broken and scarred, refused. I looked at the badge, then at the door leading out of Brad's apartment. The metallic tang of ozone, that herald of the truly horrific, was growing stronger. I knew, with a fatal certainty, that Brad was coming, and this time, I wasn't just observing, I was next. My old leather jacket suddenly felt flimsy, threadbare. I had to move. I had to act. And for the first time in a long time, the fear was almost overshadowed by a strange, bitter resolve. Almost. The world narrowed to the sound of claws scraping tile, a wet, guttural shriek that was once the laugh I loved. My vision swam, red-tinged, as a shadow descended, heavy and smelling of copper and something else. Something metallic and rotten. This wasn't Sarah. This was a nightmare wearing her skin, and it was coming for me. My last, ragged gasp of air caught in my throat, choked by the terror coiling in my gut like a venomous snake, before I hit the floor, scrambling backward, a primal scream dying in my chest. That wasn't the first time I'd seen her, or what she'd become, but it was the first time I understood the abyss we were staring into. It had begun, subtly, insidiously, months earlier, on a morning that smelled of frying eggs and false security, a morning when I was still foolish enough to believe in a normal life. I used to think I had a handle on normalcy. It was a flimsy thing, a paper-thin veneer over the chaos of the world, but it was my normalcy. And Sarah, my Sarah, she was the very foundation of it. We'd met years ago when the world was still a chaotic, vibrant thing instead of the muted, dangerous hum it is now. Back then, I was younger, less cynical, less prone to checking my old analog wristwatch every 5 minutes as a nervous tick. We just clicked. It wasn't some grand, cinematic romance. It was a slow, steady burn, built on shared silences and the kind of easy laughter that doesn't need an audience. She saw me, really saw me, back when being seen felt like a comfort, not a vulnerability. She was my anchor, a constant amidst the transient jobs and the low thrum of anxiety that had always been a quiet hum in my chest, a legacy of a past I preferred not to prod. She cooked, actual meals that filled our small apartment with the scent of garlic and comfort. I, the less culinarily inclined, stuck to baked goods, cookies, cupcakes, anything that could be measured precisely and didn't require browning. We cleaned together, Argued over the right way to fold laundry, her way was always right, and filled our nights with the same obscure movies, the same classic rock, the same dog-eared books. We liked physical contact, the brush of a hand, a quiet hug, but also valued our space, our quiet moments. We were a team, a proper, functioning team, or so I thought. Looking back, the signs were there, subtle as a whisper on a crowded street, easily dismissed, especially by someone who preferred not to look too closely at the cracks. It started about a year ago, a quiet erosion, a slow seeping of something cold into the warmth we'd built. I was in the kitchen, wrestling with a skillet and a stubborn batch of scrambled eggs. The smell of butter and protein thick in the air, a comforting, mundane scent. Sarah was on the sofa, bathed in the blue glow of her phone, her thumb scrolling with a hypnotic rhythm. TikTok, of course, the latest digital siren call. Hey Gersonim, you want these scrambled, or you feeling more like sunny side up this morning? I asked, my voice cutting through the gentle sizzle of the eggs. No answer, just the soft click of her phone screen. I shrugged, figuring she was just absorbed, lost in whatever digital void she was staring into. I did it too, sometimes, zoned out, the world narrowing to a glowing rectangle. Normal, or what passed for it. I focused on the eggs, flipping them with practiced ease, the spatula scraping against the hot metal. The quiet stretched, a little longer than usual. A thought, faint as a moth's wings, brushed against my mind. She's usually quick to answer. She likes to talk about food. I dismissed it. Paranoia. Leo. Just paranoia. I walked over to the living room, spatula still in hand, a little more slowly than I needed to. Hey, did you hear me? What you watching? I tried for casual, for lighthearted, but there was a faint, insistent tremor of unease beneath it. She looked up, a smile spreading across her face. Too wide, maybe? Or was I just imagining things? The smile didn't quite reach her eyes. Those beautiful, green eyes. She just said, TikTok, her voice a little flat, almost robotic. My internal alarm bells, usually a symphony, were still just a single, tentative chime. It was unsettling, but not enough to call the fire department. Not yet. Eggs, scrambled or sunny side up? I repeated, a little more firmly. Sunny side, she mumbled, already looking back at the phone. I went back to the kitchen, a faint frown etching itself between my brows. We ate in a silence that felt heavier than usual, punctuated only by the clinking of forks against ceramic and the faint, tinny sounds of whatever was playing on her phone. She barely touched her food. I remember watching her, a strange sense of unfamiliarity creeping in. It was like she was a stranger performing a familiar routine. The movements a little off, the energy wrong. Then, out of nowhere, she mentioned vacation. Philippines, she said, her voice soft, almost a whisper. I blinked, surprised. Where? The Philippines. Wow. We can always take a week off work. You know, been meaning to get away. A genuine smile broke through my unease. A trip. Maybe this was what she needed. A change of scenery, a break from the routine. I was still stupidly optimistic back then. She didn't answer. Her head was down, her gaze fixed on the table, as if the grain of the wood held some profound secret. The silence stretched, long and uncomfortable. It felt like walking on thin ice. Every breath a careful calculation. I felt a knot of concern tighten in my stomach. What was going on? She'd brought it up. Now she was retreating. This wasn't Sarah. Sarah would have been buzzing with ideas, pulling up photos, talking about beaches and food. Then, just as suddenly as she'd gone quiet, she sprang up, almost knocking her chair over, and said, I want to go to the Philippines. Her voice was a little too loud, a little too bright. I stayed silent for a whole minute, my mind reeling. The abruptness, the shift in her demeanor. It was like watching a switch flip. It was deeply unsettling. But then, the idea of a trip, of escaping, of recapturing what we had, took hold. I forced a smile. "Okay," I said, a little breathlessly. "Okay, let's do it." She smiled then. A small, cute, almost shy smile. The old Sarah. My Sarah. It melted something cold in my chest. I remembered covering my mouth, a blush rising to my cheeks. I was still completely, hopelessly and stupidly in love with her. That smile, that fleeting glimpse of the woman I knew, became a talisman. For the rest of the month, as I pored over travel sites, booked tickets, bought us new clothes, and saved every spare dollar for souvenirs, that smile was all I saw. It fueled me, made me ignore the growing distance, the increasingly blank looks, the subtle strangeness that had begun to cling to her like a faint scent. The day of the trip arrived. I was up before the sun, the nervous energy of travel thrumming through my veins. The apartment was still, bathed in the pre-dawn gloom. I went to the car, started the engine, letting it warm up in the chill morning air, then headed back inside. Half an hour until we needed to leave for the airport, an hour until boarding, plenty of time if everything went smoothly, which, in my life, it rarely did. I went into our bedroom, empty. The sheets were still rumpled on her side, but she wasn't there. My stomach clenched. "Sarah?" I called out, my voice tight. Silence. I walked to the bathroom door, a familiar dread beginning to coil. "You in there?" "Yes." Her voice muffled but clear. I exhaled, a ragged sound. "Okay, fine, just a last-minute bathroom trip. Nothing to worry about." Only when, as the minutes ticked by, it became something to worry about. 5 minutes passed. 10, 15. The clock on the wall, a cheap digital thing that mocked my analog watch, glared at me. 25 minutes until we had to leave. We were going to miss the flight. Panic, cold and sharp, began to prickle at my skin. I started to pace, hands running through my hair, a low moan escaping my lips. My chest tightened, the familiar vice of anxiety squeezing the air from my lungs. I imagined the wasted money, the lost vacation, the frustration building to an unbearable peak. I walked back to the bathroom door, knuckles white as I rapped on it, trying to keep my voice even. Calm. "Sarah, please, we have to go. We're going to miss the flight. Please hurry." The door opened. She stepped out, fully dressed, but her expression was wrong. Her brow was furrowed, a faint frown playing on her lips, as if Yash were the one inconveniencing her. My jaw tightened. The blood, money, and time I'd invested, the hope I'd clung to, flared into a hot, furious anger. My reluctant conscience was buried under a pile of righteous indignation. "Are you serious?" I snapped, my voice cracking. "What the hell? Why aren't you ready? I spent so much money on this trip, this vacation you wanted. Get in the car. I don't give a damn if you're not ready. We're leaving. Now." Her eyes, those beautiful green eyes I adored, narrowed. Then, slowly, deliberately, she rolled them at me, my anger, already scalding, turned molten. "Did you just roll your eyes? At me? After everything? I spent over $1,000 on this. Sarah, $1,000! Do you have any idea how much I scraped and saved? How much I looked forward to this trip for you? Get in the goddamn car. Now!" "I don't want to go," she mumbled, her voice flat, devoid of emotion. I scoffed, a short, sharp sound of disbelief. "You're joking, no, right? This is some kind of sick joke?" She just stared at me, her expression hardening into something cold, something I didn't recognize. My anger, irrational and ugly, was still burning. I knew it. I knew I was being a monumental jerk. I had never, not once, yelled at her like this in our entire relationship. But the thought of all that money, all that hope, all that effort, vanishing because she didn't want to go, was more than I could bear. My internal monologue, usually so cynical, was screaming with self-recrimination even as the words flew out. You're being an ass, Leo. A complete, total ass. We made it to the airport with 5 minutes to spare, a frantic, breathless dash through the echoing terminal. I mumbled an apology, my pride still stinging, her face still set in that unfamiliar frown. The flight was a blur of cramped seats and tense silence. The vacation itself was normal, blandly, terrifyingly normal. Like a stage play where the actors were slightly off kilter, their lines delivered without conviction. We ate, we swam, we visited tourist traps. We even managed a few strange smiles for photos. It was like a dream, hazy and forgettable. And by the time we were back home, the airport incident, the strange quiet, the eye roll, it had all faded into the background, dismissed as pre-travel jitters and an overdue argument. Nothing to worry about, I told myself. A blip, a minor tremor. I was wrong. Months later, the dreams started, not nightmares. At first, just dreams. Persistent, recurring. I couldn't remember the details when I woke up. Only the heavy, oppressive feeling, the faint chill that clung to my skin, and the overwhelming knowledge that I'd been dreaming of her. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, heart hammering, and turn to look at Sarah, curled beside me, soft and warm and seemingly oblivious. And then, seeing her there, safe and comfortable, I'd drift back to sleep, dismissing the dreams as stress or bad pizza. Then, one morning, I woke up, and the dream wasn't a hazy memory. It was vivid, terrifyingly so. In the dream, she was running around me, laughing, like a little kid. The old Sarah, full of energy and mischief. I was smiling, laughing too, basking in her uncomplicated joy. And then, she stumbled. Not a graceful fall, but a sickening collapse. Her laughter morphed into a choked sob, tears streaming down her face, and her eyes, her beautiful green eyes. They weren't green anymore. They turned red, a startling, arterial red, then faded to a sickly, milky white, like the eyes of something dead or something unborn. Then, she vomited, a thick, viscous stream of blood, dark as crude oil, staining the pristine white floor of the dreamscape. The metallic smell, even in the dream, was sickeningly real. I woke with a jolt, gasping, the taste of bile in my mouth, the lingering scent of copper in my nostrils. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat of pure adrenaline. My body was slick with cold sweat, the sheets tangled around my legs. I rolled over. The image of those eyes burned into my retina. Red, pale, dead. I looked at Sarah, lying beside me, still asleep. But the memory of the dream, the horrifying transformation, made my breath catch. Her eyes were closed, thank God. But what if? My anxiety, a beast I'd learned to keep caged, was clawing its way out. I reached out a trembling hand, hesitated, then gripped her shoulder. My knuckles were white. "Sarah," I whispered, shaking her gently. "Sarah, wake up." No response. The panic spiked, a hot, searing wave washing over me. "Sarah," I cried, shaking her harder, tears stinging my own eyes. My voice was a frantic, desperate plea. Her eyes fluttered open. Green. Still green. My beautiful Sarah. Relief, sudden and overwhelming, crashed over me, pulling the air from my lungs. The adrenaline, which had been pumping through me like a fire hose, suddenly drained away, leaving me weak and trembling. I broke down, sobbing, clinging to her, burying my face in her shoulder. "Oh, God, Sarah," I choked out, tears soaking her pajama top. I had such a terrible dream. You, you were. I couldn't even finish the sentence. She didn't try to reassure me. Didn't say, it's just a dream, baby. She just looked at me, her green eyes unnervingly steady, and said, in a soft, flat voice, "You saw what you weren't meant to see." The word, so calm, so devoid of comfort, hung in the air like a cold mist. My remaining adrenaline had come and gone too fast, leaving me utterly spent. I was too tired to even process it, too tired to argue, too tired to question. I just laid my head back down, pulled her closer, and cried a bit more, the dream still a vivid, horrifying painting behind my eyelids, before finally, mercifully, falling back into a troubled sleep. When I woke again, the first thing I registered was a faint, metallic smell, like old coins or a butcher shop. My eyes, still gritty from sleep and tears, opened slowly. The morning light was filtering through the blinds, casting stripes across the room. And there, on the side of the bed Sarah always slept on, was a dark, viscous puddle. My sleep-addled brain, ever eager for the mundane, immediately supplied an explanation. "Oh, period. Just bled through." It was gross, but normal. Nothing to panic about. Then, I wiped my eyes, clearing the last vestiges of sleep, and focused. The puddle wasn't small. It was a dark, almost black mass, sprawling across the sheet, soaking into the mattress. It was the size of a fat cat, curled up. My breath caught. My stomach lurched. This wasn't normal. This was too much. Far, far too much. The metallic smell intensified, making my nostrils flare. It was blood. Thick, dark, arterial blood. A rising tide of panic, icy and relentless, surged through me. My breathing hitched, shallow and quick, bordering on hyperventilation. I scrambled out of bed, my feet hitting the cold floor, the horror of the sight momentarily paralyzing me. "Sarah?" I whispered, my voice hoarse. My eyes darted around the room. Empty. I grabbed my phone, fingers fumbling, and started to dial 911, my heart a frantic hummingbird in my chest. No. Wait. What am I going to tell them? My wife bled out in her sleep? That's insane. And where is she? I crept out of the bedroom, phone clutched in my trembling hand, the emergency number half dialed. The air in the hallway felt heavy, thick with an unseen presence. Every shadow seemed to deepen. Every mundane object seemed to twist into something sinister. I found her in the living room, or at what I thought was her. She was on the floor, on all fours. Her back was arched at an unnatural angle, spine twisted, limbs crooked and bent like broken branches. Her head was down, obscured by a curtain of tangled hair. A faint, wet sound, like something chewing on gristle, filled the silence. My blood ran cold. The phone slipped from my grasp, clattering to the hardwood floor. Forgotten. "Sarah," I whimpered, a raw, terrified sound. She lifted her head slowly. Her eyes were still green, but wide, unfocused, and streaming with tears. Not tears of sadness, but of effort, of strain. Her jaw was slack, mouth slightly agape, and I could see something dark and wet on her teeth, glistening in the faint light. A primal shriek tore from my throat, a sound of pure, unadulterated horror. I had one last, desperate gasp of air before my knees buckled, and I collapsed onto the floor, scrambling backward, hands clamped over my mouth, trying to stifle the whimpers, the terror, the bile rising in my throat. She looked at me, those tear-filled, green eyes, and then, with a horrifying, wet grunt, she pounced. The world exploded into a blur of motion, a flurry of limbs and a sickening, animalistic growl. I reacted on pure instinct, a survival mechanism honed by years of running from things I didn't understand. I threw myself backward, scrambling to my feet, my legs burning with a sudden surge of adrenaline. I bolted towards the bathroom, the only room with a lock, the only place I could think of. I can't recall the specifics of that desperate sprint, only the searing pain in my lungs, the frantic pounding of my heart against my ribs, and the terrifying knowledge that something was right behind me, something that wanted to tear me apart. I slammed the bathroom door shut behind me, the cheap wood rattling in its frame, and fumbled for the lock. The click, when it finally engaged, was the sweetest sound I'd ever heard. I leaned against the door, gasping, body trembling uncontrollably, the cold ceramic of the tiles seeping into my skin. My breath hitched, ragged and shallow. My eyes darted to the mirror. My reflection was a wild-eyed stranger, hair disheveled, face pale and streaked with sweat and tears. I barely recognized myself. Outside the door, the banging started. Not just a simple knock, but a heavy, deliberate thud, as if something substantial was throwing itself against the wood. The sounds were punctuated by a wet, guttural scraping, a tearing sound. And then, the worst of it, her voice. "I love you," it rasped, thick with a liquid gurgle. But it wasn't Sarah's voice. Not really. It was Sarah's voice. Yes, but distorted, stretched, warped into something monstrous, something beyond human. The words were a mockery, a chilling parody of affection, laced with something hungry and predatory. "I love you." Each syllable was a fresh blade twisting in my gut. My hand was shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. I finally managed to connect to 911. "Help me," I croaked, my voice barely a whisper, thick with terror. My wife." I couldn't form the words. What was I supposed to say? My wife turned into a monster and is trying to kill me? They'd lock me up. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the noises stopped, the banging ceased, the wet scraping faded, the distorted whisper died. An eerie, profound silence descended, broken only by the frantic hammering of my own heart against my ribs, and a sound, a quiet, steady drip, drip, drip. Blood. I didn't need to see it to know. I could feel it, an oppressive weight in the air, a metallic tang on my tongue. And then, a new sound, a knock, from the front door. Loud, authoritative. The police, finally. Relief, pure and unadulterated, washed over me, so potent it almost made me weak. But the memory of what was outside the bathroom door, of the silence, of the dripping, was a cold counterpoint. No way in hell was I going out that door. Not yet. Not until I knew it was safe. Lucky for me, our bathroom had a small, frosted window. I fumbled with the latch, forcing it open. The cool morning air, a welcome shock to my fevered skin. I stuck my head out, ignoring the chill. "Over here," I yelled, my voice hoarse from disuse. "In the bathroom, over here." Soon, I heard the heavy boots inside the apartment, the murmur of male voices, a cautious knock on the bathroom door. "Police, are you all right in there, sir?" "Yes, just be careful. Please." My voice trembled, betraying the fragile calm I was trying to maintain. The door burst open. Two officer kind of faces grim, guns drawn, scanned the small room. Their eyes widened as they took in my disheveled state, the fear etched onto my face. One of them, a burly man with kind eyes, holstered his weapon and took my arm gently. "All right, sir, let's get you out of here." As they escorted me out, the scene hit me like a physical blow. The walls, they were covered, not just splattered, but coated in thick, dark blood. Streaks and smears marred the once clean surfaces, like some abstract, horrifying art piece. My gaze fell to the hallway floor, a long, dark trail, a macabre breadcrumb path, led from the living room to the bathroom door. And then I looked down at myself. My jeans, my legs, they were soaked and cut. deep, jagged slashes, as if something had clawed at me, torn at my flesh. My brain, blessedly, had blocked out the pain, the physical assault. But now, as I registered the sight, an immense, bone-shattering pain erupted. It was like 1,000 tiny needles piercing my flesh, followed by a dull, throbbing ache that consumed my entire body. My legs buckled. I barely heard the officer's exclamation as I collapsed, darkness beginning to creep in at the edges of my vision. The hospital was a blur of fluorescent lights, sterile smells, and hushed voices. Nurses, doctors, questions I couldn't answer. They stitched my wounds, ran tests, gave me IVs. They called my parents, my family, people I hadn't seen in years, people who had always kept a polite distance. Ever since, my whole family, it turned out, had disowned me. They wanted nothing to do with it. With me, mental breakdown, I heard one of the nurses whisper. Grief-induced psychosis. They didn't understand. They couldn't. Not one person I thought even remotely cared showed up. I was alone. Utterly, completely, terrifyingly alone. It wasn't surprising, just confirming. Confirmed what I already suspected. The world was a lonely, dangerous place, and I was on my own. It just reinforced the notion that I was fundamentally an anomaly. A magnet for the kind of horrors most people could just dismiss as urban legends or mental illness. Once I recovered enough to stand, enough to pull on clothes that felt too big for my newly gaunt frame, I got my meager belongings from what was left of our apartment. The place was a biohazard, a scene out of a horror movie. My worn leather jacket, miraculously unsullied, was the only thing that felt familiar, a comforting weight on my shoulders. My go bag was still by the door, packed and ready, as always. A premonition, perhaps. I left the country. The U.S. felt too small, too filled with ghosts. Europe, somewhere far. I picked the UK because it was the first place that came to mind. A gray, damp island, a place where anonymity was a virtue. The next 6 months were a fog of grief, paranoia, and a creeping, insidious madness. Every shadow seemed to shift. Every unexpected sound made me jump. I'd wake up in cold sweats, convinced Sarah was there, or what she'd become. My old analog wristwatch, a grounding presence, became a constant fidget toy, my thumb rubbing the worn metal as if to erase the memories. I wandered the streets, a ghost among the living, haunted by the memory of her sweet, kind presence, the way she used to laugh, the gentle touch of her hand. I kept replaying that morning, the fight, my stubbornness, my anger. Could I have saved her? If I hadn't forced her on that trip, would she still be my Sarah? The guilt was a constant companion, a heavy cloak I couldn't shed. After about half a year, the loneliness and the questions became unbearable. I needed answers. I couldn't just live with this. I went online, risking exposure, and started searching. Wife changed. Bizarre transformation. Blood sickness. I sifted through conspiracy theories, medical journals, and obscure forums. Days blurred into nights. Then, I found it. A mention, buried deep in a thread about parasitic entities and psychological manipulation. The Nerovirus. I reached out to the person who'd mentioned it. They were strange, cautious, but they talked. And what they told me, what I read, twisted the knife of guilt deeper into my gut. The Nerovirus, they explained, a parasitic entity, not a biological virus, not in the traditional sense. It operated on a psychological level first. It would whisper to you, a small, insistent voice in your head, urging you to travel to a specific place, always out of your home country. It would trick you into believing it was a sign, a premonition of good fortune, a necessary pilgrimage. The virus's home was in a different environment, a place where its influence was strongest. Once you were there, once your body was adapting to a new climate, new air, new pathogens, the virus took advantage. It began its slow, insidious takeover. Physical changes, behavioral shifts, a complete loss of self. The host became a puppet, their body a vehicle for the entity's will. Some people, the lucky few, could resist. They'd feel the urge, the whispers, but they'd realize, even at the last minute, that it was a trick. They'd fight the urge to travel, they'd stay home, they'd survive. My blood ran cold. The Philippines trip, her idea, my stubborn refusal to back down, my anger, my frustration, my selfish desire not to lose money. I had forced her to go. I had pushed her into the gaping maw of that thing. I was the one who had condemned her. "I don't want to go," she had said. The words so flat, so devoid of emotion. She was resisting, even then. My Sarah, fighting the thing in her head. And I had screamed at her. I had forced her. Why didn't she tell me? Why didn't she explain? But then, the virus probably wouldn't let her. It was subtle, insidious, and my reaction, my outburst, maybe it had scared her into silence. She had suffered because of me. My fatal flaw, my reluctant conscience, was now a gaping, bleeding wound. Every day since, the guilt has been a heavy stone in my gut, a constant, crushing reminder of my failure. It's been about a year since it happened. A year of running, a year of looking over my shoulder, a year of the world becoming a bleaker, more dangerous place. I feel sorry. Sorry for Sarah. Sorry for myself. Sorry for the ghost of the man I used to be. And now, I'm just Leo, the weary wanderer, the haunted everyman, always moving, always looking, always ready to run, because some things you realize you can never outrun. You just keep adding new layers to the trauma. The scream wasn't mine, but it tore through me just the same. A high, thin wail that echoed off the vaulted ceilings of Esme Lockhart's gilded cage. My hands, slick and crimson, still gripped the ornate hilt of the ceremonial blade, the last desperate thrust still burning in my forearms. The vibrant white of her wedding dress, now a canvas of arterial spray, clung to her like a second skin, a sickening mockery of purity. Her eyes, those chilling ice-blue eyes that had seen too much and desired to control all, stared blankly up at the crystal chandelier, already glazing over. The drilling sound in my head, a relentless, pulsating throb that had been building for weeks, deafened me now, a crescendo of impossible noise. It was a liberation, a terror, a horrific act that cemented me deeper into the cosmic mud I perpetually tried to outrun. It hadn't always been like this. Not for them, not for me. The drilling, the terror, the cold, steel certainty of a blade in my hand. It all began weeks ago, when a dead-end security job dropped me into the heart of a darkness I should have known better than to touch. The job at the Lockhart estate was supposed to be a reprieve, a quiet night shift, an anonymous paycheck. A few more days off the grid before the gnawing unease of my past caught up again. I'd seen the ad in a diner window, a handwritten scrap promising discreet security, no questions asked. Sounded like my kind of gig. I pulled my worn leather jacket tighter against the late autumn chill as I drove the beat-up pickup down the long, winding driveway, the old analog wristwatch on my wrist ticking away the minutes. My internal clock, always calibrated for escape, was already restless. The sprawling Victorian mansion, dark against the bruised twilight sky, looked less like a home and more like a mausoleum for secrets. Or maybe, I thought with a grim chuckle, a very expensive asylum. The first few nights were uneventful, lulling me into a false sense of security. I patrolled the extensive grounds, a heavy mag light in hand, its beam cutting through the oppressive darkness like a desperate prayer. The air always felt heavy here, thick with the scent of damp earth and something else. Something faintly metallic, like old blood, or perhaps just the ozone before a storm. I told myself it was the damp, the age of the place. My mind was always looking for the rational explanation, even when my gut screamed otherwise. My past had taught me that. My past, a shapeless, consuming void that occasionally spit out echoes of a fire, a scream, a profound, crushing loss I couldn't quite remember, but could always feel. It was the reason I was on the road, running from a shadow that wore my own face. My shifts ran from midnight to dawn. It was during these hours that I started noticing the small things. The lights flickering in distant rooms where no one should be. The faint, almost imperceptible scuttling sounds from within the walls. Not rats, but something larger, more deliberate. The way the grand front door, supposedly locked from the inside, would be slightly ajar when I made my rounds. As if someone had just slipped out or in. I'd check the lock, test the heavy wood, my fingers brushing over the cold brass. My hand would stray to my wristwatch, thumb tracing the glass. Just nerves, I'd tell myself. A tired brain playing tricks. But the unease was a persistent itch under my skin, impossible to scratch. Then there were the friends, Esme Lockhart's inner circle. They drifted in and out of the house at odd hours, like ghosts themselves, their faces pale, their eyes hollow. Harry, Wylan, Ariosa. Their names were whispered by the few staff members I encountered, always with a mixture of reverence and pity. Harry, tall and gaunt, his shoulders permanently slumped as if under an invisible weight. Wylan, twitchy, perpetually on edge, his gaze darting around like a cornered animal. And Ariosa, fragile as spun glass, prone to stifled sobs that would occasionally echo through the house's vast, empty spaces. They seemed less like friends and more like captives, bound by an invisible, unbreakable chain to Esme Lockhart herself. I saw Esme most often at dawn, a vision of preternatural perfection descending the grand staircase. Her golden curls cascaded down her shoulders, catching the first pale light of morning, shimmering like molten gold. Her eyes, those piercing ice blue eyes, seemed to cut through everything, their intensity unnerving, as if she could peer directly into the secrets of your soul. Her crimson lips would curve into a smile that was less an expression of joy and more a silent threat, the sharp edges of her teeth barely visible. She was a work of art, painstakingly crafted, but beneath the flawless skin, I sensed a predator, a shadow lurking just beneath the surface. My survivor's gaze, honed by years of sniffing out danger, screamed at me to turn away, to walk out, to run. But the reluctant conscience, that fatal flaw I cursed daily, whispered, "Stay, look closer." One particularly cold night, as I was checking the perimeter near the sprawling, overgrown rose garden, I found Harry. He was hunched over, shivering, a lit cigarette glowing like a tiny, defiant ember between his fingers. The wind, sharp and biting, clawed at my face, rattling the dry leaves in the trees. He flinched violently when my maglite beam found him, his eyes wide with a terror that was too raw to fake. "Vance," he rasped, his voice a dry whisper. "You're new here. You don't understand." I knelt beside him, my voice low, hoping to calm the animal fear in his eyes. "Understand what, Harry?" He hesitated, glancing back at the looming mansion as if its windows were eyes. "Her, Esme, she owns us. Always has." He shuddered, pulling his knees to his chest. "We were kids, 5 of us. She was the leader. Her house, our kingdom. Only she took best friends forever, a little too literally." He paused and taking a long, shaky drag from his cigarette. "She doesn't like it when we try to leave. When we try to make other friends, she makes them disappear, or she breaks them, like Ben. Ben, I'd heard the whispers. A quiet swimmer, Harry's boyfriend, gone. No one talked about it, not directly. Harry's jaw tightened. She broke him, systematically, made his life a living hell, until he just vanished. He stared out into the darkness, his voice barely audible above the rustling leaves. Sometimes, I hear the drilling, inside my head, a pulsing sound, like she's trying to bore a hole right through my skull and rewire my brain. My hand went to my wristwatch, an unconscious tick. The drilling. I hadn't known what it was, but I'd felt it too. A low, resonant hum, a pressure behind my eyes that worsened when Esme was near, or when the house was particularly quiet. I dismissed it as exhaustion, or the onset of another migraine. Now, hearing Harry describe it, a cold dread coiled in my stomach. It wasn't just me, it was her. This wasn't some natural phenomenon. It was a psychic assault. It dragged me back to the edges of my own repressed memories. The vague, shapeless terror of Sycamore Grove, the fire, the screams, the sense of something else being present. This was different, yet terrifyingly familiar in its violation. "We could kill her," Harry said, his voice flat, devoid of humor, the words hanging in the cold air between us like frozen breath. "Dump her in the sea. Problem solved." I stared at him, the maglite beam forgotten, pointing uselessly at the damp earth. "You're an idiot," I rasped, but the words felt hollow, a desperate attempt to cling to the sanity that was slowly slipping away. His suggestion, grotesque as it was, resonated with a chilling logic. It was the solution to an impossible problem. The drilling in my head, now, seemed to amplify his words, pushing them deeper into my consciousness. The days that followed were a waking nightmare. Esme seemed to sense the shift in the air, the desperate edge to Harry's despair. Her perfect smile grew wider, her eyes colder. The drilling intensified, a constant, low thrum that vibrated behind my eyeballs, making concentration impossible. It felt like a physical pressure, like someone was trying to force open a locked door in my mind. Sleep offered no escape. Her face, her smile, the sound of that incessant drilling infiltrated my dreams. I'd wake in a cold sweat, my heart hammering against my ribs, the taste of fear metallic on my tongue. I started sketching again, a habit I'd picked up on the road as a way to process the horrors I encountered. On torn scraps of paper, I'd draw Esme's face, trying to capture the unnatural perfection, the subtle wrongness of her eyes, the phantom drilling symbolized by swirling lines around her head. It was an attempt to take the terror out of my mind and pin it to a page, to make it tangible, something I could confront. Then came the announcement, a celebration, a renewal of vows, a wedding. It wasn't just a party, it was a ritual. The way Esme spoke of it, with that saccharine sweetness that grated on my nerves, I knew. She wasn't just binding them with love, she was binding them with a twisted, unbreakable pact. Harry was the groom. He looked like a corpse in waiting. The day of the wedding dawned cold and gray, mirroring the landscape of my soul. The air in the house was thick, cloying, heavy with the scent of lilies and dread. I stood by the grand swimming pool, converted into a bizarre ceremonial space, the pale light reflecting off the water, creating shifting, watery shadows on the walls. I was just a security guard, a silent witness, but the drilling in my head was a roar now, an unbearable pressure that threatened to split my skull. My hand found my old analog wristwatch, my thumb tracing its cold face. Not for time, for grounding. Harry stood beside me, not as a friend, but as a ghost. His once lively brown eyes were now hollow, rimmed with dark shadows as if he hadn't slept in years. His hands clenched and unclenched at his sides, trembling slightly, betraying the fear he tried so hard to mask. The faint quiver in his jaw, the way his gaze darted to the exits. He was a man on the edge, caught between terror and the desperate hope for escape. The flower crown perched on his head seemed like a cruel joke, a vibrant mockery of the boy who used to grin so easily. It made him look like a sacrificial lamb. Wylan and Ariosa, our other childhood friends, stood nearby like broken mannequins, their smiles frozen and vacant. Wylan's fingers trembled as he nervously twisted the hem of his jacket, his shallow breast betraying the panic that flickered behind his dull eyes. Ariosa clutched her dress as if it were the only thing grounding her to reality, her knuckles white, her lips trembling as she fought to suppress the muffled sobs that added a layer of raw despair to the grotesque cheeriness of Esme's commands. They were beyond help, I thought, looking at them, hollowed out. I could feel their collective despair like a tangible weight in the room, pressing down on my own chest, making it hard to breathe. My own hands trembled uncontrollably, hidden in the folds of my security uniform. I gripped the cold hilt of the ceremonial dagger I'd found on a nearby display table. It was ancient, ornate, almost a foot long, with a blued steel blade that caught the faint light. It felt both grounding and suffocating, a cruel reminder of what I might have to do. My breath came in uneven gasps, the air catching painfully in my throat as if my body was rebelling against me, my vision blurred with unshed tears, the enormity of the situation pressing down like a tidal wave. I could feel the tremor in my knees threatening to give out, the room around me spinning as every instinct screamed at me to flee. But the knife remained steady in my grasp, its purpose becoming agonizingly clear, even as my mind spiraled into chaos. My heart pounded like a trapped animal in my chest, a wave of nausea rising as the enormity of what lay ahead pressed down on me. This was it, the point of no return, the end of their torment, or the beginning of mine. Esme's voice was saccharine sweet as she began her vows, not to Harry, but to the collective broken wills around her. She had won. She had turned them into her perfect little dolls, bound forever in her twisted version of love, a love built on fear and control. "I do," she whispered, her gaze locking onto Harry's, then sweeping over Wylan and Ariosa, and finally settling on me. Her eyes held a triumphant, possessive glint that chilled me to the bone, and the drilling became unbearable. It wasn't just noise anymore. It was a physical force, pressing against the inside of my skull, commanding me, distorting my perception. My head felt like it was going to explode. The air was thick with the scent of lilies and the metallic tang of fear. I don't remember the exact moment I lunged. 1 second, I was standing, a prisoner of my own reluctant conscience. The next, I was propelled forward by an impulse that felt both alien and terrifyingly my own. The drilling reached a crescendo, forcing me, begging me, to make it stop. I moved, a blur of motion, driven by a primal need for cessation. Harry's eyes, wide and horrified, met mine for a fleeting instant, a flicker of understanding, perhaps even gratitude, before my vision narrowed to Esme. The blade, heavy and cold, felt like an extension of my arm as it plunged. The officiator's horrified screams mingled with the sickening sound of blood splattering on the polished marble floor, parted by death. The irony was almost laughable. If anything about this macabre spectacle could ever be funny, chaos erupted. Screams, gasps, the crash of overturned chairs. I grabbed Harry's arm, pulling him, dragging him toward the exit. He was a dead weight, stumbling, his eyes still wide with shock. Wylan and Ariosa, their movements jerky and unnatural, their faces blank with a horror that had finally shattered them, followed like automatons. They were shells, hollowed out, their minds utterly broken by what they had endured, by what I had done. We burst into the cold night air, the chill a shocking slap after the oppressive warmth of the mansion. We ran, stumbling through the manicured lawns, past the dark, silent hedges, until our lungs burned and our legs gave out, collapsing in a heap on the damp ground beside my beat-up pickup. I was breathing hard, the metallic taste of adrenaline and bile in my mouth. My hands still throbbed with the ghost of the knife's hilt. The image of Esme's eyes fixed on the ceiling burned into my retina. 2 years later, and the sound of Esme's laugh still echoes in the quiet moments. A chilling, triumphant sound that wraps around my thoughts like a shroud. Harry speaks rarely now, his words disjointed, his gaze fixed on something only he can see. He's in a facility now, one that calls itself a wellness retreat, but feels more like another kind of cage. Wylan and Ariosa are shells of themselves, their recovery more cruel mockery than progress, trapped in a loop of silent terror. And me, the scars on my wrists throb with the phantom memory of straps holding me down. A half-remembered horror from a past I can't quite grasp. A past I constantly run from. Esme's father, a man whose presence was a chilling absence, had a way of perfecting his subjects. Though I'd only heard whispers of it, I never saw him, never met him. But his influence, like a shadow, hung over everything. Sometimes in the quiet, lonely moments, driving through a desolate landscape, or sitting in a dimly lit diner, I catch a glimpse of golden curls out of the corner of my eye. Or I hear the low, insidious thrum of the drilling, a phantom echo. And when Harry, if I visit him, manages a strained, empty smile, it's Esme's grin I see, wide, victorious, eternal. She may be dead, but her hold, her curse, still lingers. And I, Leo Vance, the reluctant instrument of her demise, am still running, always running. Character count 9,890. The tang of copper and ozone clung to my tongue, thick and cloying, a taste I knew intimately, one that always presaged the kind of hell ordinary men only saw in their worst nightmares. Blood, not my own, slicked my worn leather jacket, a grotesque abstract art painted by another family's demise. The wail of sirens, growing closer, wasn't a comfort. It was the soundtrack to the end of a world, a chorus of disbelief that would soon be met with the cold, hard proof of what I just witnessed. My hands, still trembling, wanted to reach for the familiar, comforting weight of my old analog watch. But they were clenched, useless fists, sticky and warm. Plug your ears if you hear that jingle, lock your doors, and for God's sake, don't let your children near the truck. The words were a silent scream in my skull, a litany of rules carved into my very being by the last few minutes of impossible horror. But those rules, I knew, were born from the kind of knowledge that came at too high a price I just watched someone else pay in full. It had begun, as these things always did, with a deceptive whisper of normalcy, a sun-drenched afternoon that felt too perfect to be true. I'd been working the graveyard shift at the warehouse on the outskirts of Elmwood for the past month, running down some inventory discrepancies. Tonight was my last night before moving on. Another town, another forgotten job, another futile attempt to outrun the shadow that clung to me like a second skin. I was just taking a detour through a quiet, upper-middle-class suburb, looking for a shortcut back to the main highway. The air was thick with the lazy hum of summer, the kind of quiet that makes you suspicious when you've seen too much. Manicured lawns, two-car garages, the gentle scent of freshly cut grass. It was a picture of suburban bliss, a scene straight out of a damn greeting card. My hand instinctively went to the cool steel of my old wristwatch, tracing the worn edges. 4:30. Time for the kids to be out playing, for the illusion of safety to be at its most potent. That's when the jingle started. Familiar, insidious. The saccharine, tinny melody of an ice cream truck, warbling from unseen speakers. It was that specific tune, the one everyone knows, ingrained in the collective subconscious of childhood. A pleasant, nostalgic sound for anyone else. But for me, it felt like a discordant note in a symphony of dread. My blood ran cold, the kind of chill that sinks past the bone and settles in the marrow. I had no idea why, not then. Just a primal, animalistic certainty that something was profoundly wrong. My grip tightened on the steering wheel of my beat-up sedan, knuckles white. Every hair on my arm stood on end. It was the same prickle I'd felt as a child. Standing on the edge of the woods behind our house, a sense of an unseen presence, a deep-seated wrongness that had always preceded, well, everything. The jingle grew louder, rounding the corner. And then I saw it. A boxy, white truck, emblazoned with the words Mr. Frosty's Ice Cream in cheerful, melting letters. It was pristine, almost unnaturally so, glowing in the afternoon sun. No rust, no dents, no peeling paint. Too perfect. Even from a distance, the vehicle looked less like something that had traversed countless streets and more like a prop, freshly pulled from a freezer box. And the jingle, it was too loud, too clear, assaulting the senses with its cloying cheerfulness. It didn't just play, it piped, a relentless beckoning siren song that seemed to vibrate in the very air, burrowing into the soft gray matter of anyone within earshot. I watched, a morbid fascination taking hold. As a young boy, maybe 8 or 9, with a mop of blonde hair and eyes the color of a summer sky, bounced excitedly towards it. His father, a man in a polo shirt with a friendly, unassuming air, followed a few paces behind, a fond smile playing on his lips. They were a picture of innocent domesticity, the kind of scene I usually went out of my way to avoid, lest it stir up the bitter ashes of my own buried past. But now it was a tableau of impending doom, lit by the cruel, golden light of the late afternoon. My cynical brain, the one that usually told me to floor it and get out, was screaming at me. Just go. Vance, don't get involved. You know how this ends. But my other half, the reluctant conscience I cursed daily, dug its heels in. It was the same damn impulse that had kept me rooted in that dilapidated house in Sycamore Grove as a kid, when every instinct shrieked to run, to save myself. It was the same stubborn, stupid guilt that made me stop for hitchhikers, or look into the dark places I should have avoided. So, I cut the engine, the sudden silence inside my car amplifying the relentless jingle outside. I watched, my jaw tight, as the truck lumbered to a halt beside the boy, 25 feet away, maybe 30, close enough to see the details, far enough to feel utterly helpless. The father walked up, a relaxed posture, his hands in his pockets. The boy peered up at the menu board, a picture of innocent anticipation. The driver's side window was tinted, impenetrable, no glint of glass, no hint of a face within, just an inky void. And then the serving window scraped open, a sound that shouldn't have been audible from my distance, but it was, a sickening metallic shriek, like abused metal tearing on rusty rollers. The sound vibrated in my teeth, a fingernail drawn down a chalkboard, infinitely amplified. And through that newly opened gap, I saw it. Or rather, I didn't see it. The inside of the truck was drenched in shadow, a black so profound it seemed to devour the brilliant afternoon sunlight, mocking its very existence. It was like looking into a wound in reality, a tear in the fabric of the world where light ceased to exist. A chill, bone deep and absolute, bit into the air, radiating from the truck, chasing away the summer warmth. My stomach clenched. That familiar cold dread coiled in my gut. This wasn't right. This wasn't just a chill. It was the raw, unnatural cold that came before something truly awful. My mind, a cynical catalog of horrors, flashed to the things I'd glimpsed in the dark corners of the world, the whispers of entities that bled through the veil. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. Run, you idiot, run! But I was frozen, my gaze locked on the boy, on the father, on the gaping maw of the truck. The boy, Kyle, sensing something was wrong, that preternatural sixth sense children sometimes possess, turned. His bright blue eyes, wide and innocent, fixed on his father, then on the truck, a tiny flicker of confusion playing on his face. He didn't have time to process it. One moment, he was standing there, vibrant and alive. The next, a grotesque, impossible mass of spider legs exploded from the inky darkness of the serving window. Hairy, jointed feelers, a writhing, seething tangle of nightmare, shot out, coiling around the boy. He was sucked in, not pulled, but vacuumed, like shrink wrap through a powerful industrial cleaner. A sickening whoomp of air escaped his lungs, a sound devoid of a scream, as he snapped backward like a rag doll. His head hit the top of the window frame with a wet crack, lolling unnaturally to the side. And then he was gone, swallowed by the impossible darkness within the truck. A strangled sound tore from my own throat, a voiceless wail of horror and futile rage. My foot slammed on the gas pedal, the tires spitting gravel as my sedan lurched forward. I barely registered the father's guttural scream, a sound of pure, unadulterated agony that would echo in my mind for weeks. My vehicle fishtailed, and I cursed, fighting the wheel. The ice cream truck, meanwhile, began to move, the cheerful jingle still mocking the horror it had just unleashed. I jammed the car into park, leaping out before it had fully stopped, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. My worn leather jacket flapped behind me as I sprinted, fueled by a desperate, idiotic surge of that cursed conscience. What was I going to do? I had no plan, just a suicidal need to do something. I reached the truck as it pulled away, my vision blurred with adrenaline and the sickening knowledge of what I was witnessing. I slammed my fist against the side, a dull thud against the cold metal, then grabbed the edge of the serving window, pulling myself up, peering into the impossible void that had consumed the child. The interior of the truck was a spatial anomaly, a gaping, cavernous space that defied all logic. It was not a truck, it was a portal, a vast, echoing abattoir, stretching into an unseen distance. The air inside was thick with the stench of something ancient and metallic, the coppery tang of fresh blood mingling with the cloying sweetness of stale sugar and a faint, indescribable musk of decay. My eyes, ever observant, scanned the horrific panorama. Dilapidated cattle chutes, slick with a glistening, reddish-brown residue, snaked through the darkness, leading to a sprawling plant floor textured with stained, grimy linoleum. It was a factory, a killing floor, designed with an efficient, horrifying purpose. This wasn't some forgotten relic of industry. It was a living, breathing nightmare. And the livestock? Oh God, the livestock. Hundreds of them. Children, small, pale shapes. Their movements sluggish, listless. Their faces slack and devoid of expression. Their eyes were glazed, empty, like broken dolls. They shuffled along the chutes, caked in their own filth, their small forms dwarfed by the hulking figures that moved among them, figures in blood-stained aprons, their faces obscured by USGI cold weather masks, the kind designed for Arctic conditions. But here, they hid something far colder than ice. They moved with a chilling efficiency, wielding curved knives, opening throats with wet, tearing sounds. There were no screams. That was the worst part. The silence was absolute, broken only by the weak shuffle of small feet, the syrupy slap of blood hitting the floor, and the occasional soft thud of a lifeless body. The dead were hoisted, ankle up, onto a conveyor system that hummed softly in the oppressive darkness. Like at a dry cleaner's, they zipped off through a darkened portal, into the unknown. A hot trail of blood still sprayed from their severed necks, misting the air with a fine crimson spray. I felt a wave of nausea so profound it threatened to buckle my knees. My stomach roiled, a hot rush of vomit threatening to climb my throat. This was it. This was the source, the wellspring of the cosmic dread that had haunted me since Sycamore Grove. The same pervasive evil, operating with a cold, terrifying indifference. It was a familiar flavor of horror, but scaled up, infinitely more ravenous. This wasn't just a monster, it was an industry, a system. As the truck continued to pull away, my grip slipping, a pale, small hand reached out from the gloom. My heart leaped into my throat. It was Kyle, his head pitched at a sickening angle, his eyes dead, vacant, but still, something. A spark, a tiny flicker of recognition, buried beneath the horror. And then, he spoke. A single word, whispered in a voice I would never hear again. A voice stripped of its childish innocence, tinged with a chilling finality. Run! Then, with a sudden, impossible force, he slammed the serving window shut. Just as the gap closed, I saw the massive spider legs encircle him from behind, intertwining like grotesque fingers. They covered his mouth, his eyes, tearing him backward, deeper into the dark, sending him toward the slaughter line. The truck growled up the street, its cheerful jingle echoing, mocking. It turned the corner, the sound fading, and disappeared from view, carrying off the son of a stranger, a child I had tried and failed to save, just like I had failed my own family all those years ago. I stumbled back, landing hard on the asphalt, the sickening crunch of gravel under my spine. The father of the boy was already on his knees, a raw, primal howl tearing from his throat, a sound that mirrored the one I'd heard from my own mother so long ago. He looked at me, his eyes wide and vacant, the gaze of a man whose world had just been ripped apart. I didn't say anything. What could I say? Your son was taken to a meat locker run by multi-limbed horrors? The words would stick in my throat. Useless. The next few hours were a blur of flashing blue and red lights, the guttural mumble of police radios, and the flat, unblinking stares of detectives in cheap suits. The father, a man named Michael, was inconsolable. His wife, Jessica, arriving later, her scream of anguish tearing through the quiet suburban street like a physical wound. She collapsed, wailing for her son, while their daughter, Maya, perhaps 8, clung to her mother's leg, her face a mask of bewildered terror. I stayed in the background, a silent, grim observer. They asked me what I saw. I lied, told them of Mr. Frosty's ice cream truck, exactly as it was. Took him. No spider legs, no impossible interior, no slaughterhouse. They would have locked me in a padded cell. Or worse, accused me of involvement. My word carried no credence. I knew that. My life on the road, my lack of roots, my detached demeanor, it all screamed suspect. They put out a statewide APB. They found nothing. Of course, they found nothing. The night that followed was a black void of despair. I stayed, compelled by that damn conscience, by the echoing scream of the mother. I sat in my car, parked down the street, watching their house, a silent sentinel. Michael and Jessica didn't sleep. Her face was puffy, her eyes red-rimmed and vacant. Maya, the younger twin, was smart, too smart for her age. She understood the weight of the silence, the crushing grief that had descended upon their home. She had put herself to bed without fuss, a small, young, somber ghost in her pink PJ onesie. I was numb, my body cold. A sick lie, I thought, giving them any hope. I knew what I had seen, deep down, in the furthest pit of my stomach. I knew their son, like all those children, was gone, dead, blindly shuffled up the murder chute to those hulking things in bloody aprons. Around midnight, a small figure appeared in the doorway of their home, silhouetted against the dim light within. Maya, clutching her pink blanket, her eyes wide but not with simple fear. Something else, recognition. A chill snaked up my spine. This wasn't normal grief. This was the prelude to something I knew all too well. Michael, hollow-eyed, looked at his wife. "What?" he mumbled, barely audible. "Jessica," her voice thick with snot and tears, blew into a tissue. "Kyle's out there. We should be looking for him, trying to find that truck." She cut him an accusing glare, the blame a palpable thing between them. It wasn't her fault. It wasn't his. It was the truck's. Then Maya spoke, her voice a thin, reedy whisper that cut through the night, slicing through the remnants of false hope. "He's home, Daddy," she said. "Kyle's home." My blood ran cold. The kind of cold that steals your breath, that leaves your skin clammy and your mind screaming, "No, not this, not again." My hand, trembling, went to my watch. The minute hand seemed frozen. I watched, my heart thundering as Michael and Jessica rushed to the back door. The porch light flickered on, painting the scene in a sickly yellow glow. The thing that came through their back door was not their son. It looked like Kyle. It walked like him, a shambling, mud-caked gait. But it wasn't him, not truly. Its pale skin was streaked with grime, but it was the eyes that froze me, cold and dead. Not the warm, innocent blue puddles they had been, but two icy marbles that seemed to freeze the air around them. There was a knowing, malevolent smile twisting its face, a parody of childish innocence. Jessica sobbed, wrapping the mud-streaked imitation of her son in an embrace. It didn't hug back. Those two cold eyes were pinned on Michael, then on me, a flicker of something ancient and terrible in their depths, as if acknowledging my presence, my curse. "Why'd you do it, Daddy?" The voice was Kyle's, but it was wrong. Too flat, too hollow. They led it into the living room, a family walking into a nightmare. I could feel Maya's body tense up against her mother's, a small, desperate tremor. She knew. She saw it. She knows something bad is about to happen. "What?" Jessica asked, her voice cracking with confusion. "Why'd you try to kill me? Try to kill me, huh, Daddy? Why? I thought you loved me. Dad, I thought you..." Its head reared back impossibly far on its neck, a sickening crackle of cartilage and bone. Its mouth curved into a dark, perfect O, growing wider, impossibly wide. A throaty, gurgling sound emanated from its throat. Its eyes rolled back into their sockets, showing only the whites, like a pair of blind, unseeing orbs. Jessica looked at Michael, her eyes wide with dawning horror, then back at the thing that was supposed to be her son. She started backing up, a slow, terrified shuffle. Michael, too, was frozen, his face ashen. They retreated into the living room, the Kyle thing bearing down on them, forcing them back. Maya had started to sob, clutching her pink blanket to her face, her warm, salty tears soaking her mother's shirt. The O of Kyle's mouth continued to expand, drawing further and further as it spoke again. Only this time, its lips didn't move. And the voice, deeper, warped, like the words of a demon from the mouth of the possessed, came hissing out of its throat, a wet, guttural sound that seemed to tear at the very fabric of reality. "Why, Dad? Why'd you fucking do it? You like killing little kids. Dad? Want to kill Maya? Want to see her pigtails wrapped in brain? Stop!" Michael's voice was a weak, thin rasp, lost in the echoing horror. The thing chuckled, a wet, slithering sound, as Kyle's mouth continued pulling back, impossibly wide. Its lips were coated in a glistening bile, thick and viscous. Its teeth were brown and jagged, like broken splinters of ancient bone. Jessica's head snapped between the monstrosity that wore her son's face and her husband, her face a mask of shattered disbelief. Her legs hit the couch, and she crumpled onto the cushion with a surprised gasp. It was lost in the hoarse, demonic voice that had hijacked her son's mouth. "Want to bash her little head in? Hammer it until crumples and all those little girl thoughts and feelings come spilling out?" The corners of the Kyle thing's mouth tore. Rivulets of blood, dark and sluggish, sledded down its throat, staining the front of its mud-streaked shirt. Its mouth continued to pull back, like its head was splitting up on a hinge. Bone and tendons snapping and crackling with sickening wet sounds. The lower half of its face was soaked in its own grotesque blood. "Make him stop, Dad," Maya moaned, her voice muffled by her blanket, a plea for a world that no longer existed. Michael couldn't speak. His voice was lost, swallowed by the terror. His Adam's apple bobbed convulsively, but no sound escaped. The Kyle thing's mouth split wider, wider. The sound of tearing flesh and grinding bone sickeningly loud in the confined space. Its throat distended and undulated, like there was a knot of fingers trying to claw their way out. "Want to be a butcher, Dad?" The voice within the Kyle thing chuckled, a wet, slithering sound that scraped at the raw nerves of my soul. Hack through gristle and vein and the stretch of pink flesh connecting tiny heads to tiny bodies. Feel the warm rush of blood over your hands. Feel your knife scrape bone as they drain. Its words were a poison, meant to break the man, to unravel his sanity. Want to watch the light bleed from their eyes as their life bleeds from their throat? Want to, Dad? Want to? Then, with a final horrific tearing sound, the Kyle thing's head tore back, its cheeks ripping, its mouth forced open in an awful, hellish grin. And the mass of hairy, jointed spider legs exploded from its throat, writhing and snapping into the living room, a sudden, grotesque blooming of pure horror. Jessica started to scream, a high-pitched, piercing shriek of absolute terror. One of the spider legs, thick and segmented, lashed out, batting her across the face with a wet thwack. Her head snapped around, a sickening crackle echoing, and she pitched forward, landing on the couch with the boneless weight of a sack of grain. That galvanized Michael. He let out a wordless roar, galvanized by a primal, desperate surge of fatherly instinct. He flung Maya onto the couch and lurched for the rack of fireplace tools. The spider legs crackled and snapped, flickering around like a net of tendrils from the Kyle thing's broken mouth. Maya was shrieking, a raw sound of pure, childlike terror. The spider legs lunged for her, shooting forward, long and dark, aiming for her delicate, small form. Michael tore the poker free of the fire rack, a heavy, blunted piece of wrought iron. He whipped around, using his forward momentum, bringing the heavy instrument down with as much force as he could muster. A desperate, valiant swing against the impossible. Only he missed. Oh, God, how he missed. Maya, in her childlike terror, had instinctively lunged away from the spider thing trying to kill her. She had lunged right into the arc of her father's swing. The barbed end of the poker hit the center of her skull, not the monster's, and went burrowing into her brain. I heard bones snap like glass, a sickening, wet crack. I saw the poker ease into the spongy folds of her mind. She fell, like a puppet whose strings had been cut, landing face down with a sickening thud. A tiny, strangled sob escaped her lips. Her small hand clenched into a microscopic fist against the patterned rug, and then she died. The Kyle thing began to roar with laughter, a wet, gurgling sound of triumph that was utterly inhuman. It turned on Michael, its spider legs flickering and pulsing, snapping in all directions like 10 of those inflatable dealership tube men, obscenely alive. "You like killing kids, Dad? You like..." Then, a surprised gasp. The spider legs snapped erect, like soldiers at attention, as the animation drained from the Kyle thing's face. Michael, broken by what he had just done, had wrenched the poker free of his daughter's broken mind and, with a final, desperate surge of fury, plunged it into the Kyle thing's left eye. Its ocean blue eyeball deflated, a thin run of viscous, yellow pus running down one cheek. Then the tendril sucked back into its mouth with a final, wet gurgle, and the Kyle thing pitched forward, landing on the floor with a heavy, final thud, as dead as the rest of his family. I stood there on the street, misted in their children's blood, their screams still echoing in my ears. The sight of the slaughtered children inside the truck burned into my retinas. The sirens were closer now, a banshee wail. My hands, still clenched into useless fists, began to tremble uncontrollably. This was my life. This was the curse. To witness, to be drawn in, to be tainted by the horrors that stalked the edges of reality. My own past, the Sycamore Grove incident, felt less like a distant memory and more like a fresh wound, reopened by the agony of these strangers. The ice cream truck, a beacon of childhood joy, had become